Hey guys, tonight we are drifting back to a time of flickering gaslight and long, heavy shadows, a time of remarkable invention and equally remarkable anxieties. We're journeying into the heart of the Victorian era, specifically to explore the often strange, sometimes ingenious, and occasionally downright bizarre gadgets that people turn to in their desperate quest for a good night's sleep. Imagine yourself in a Victorian bedroom, the curtains drawn tight against the pea soup fog outside. The only sounds the distant clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the mournful hoot of a far-off steam train, and the relentless, maddening tick-tock of a bedside clock as you toss and turn, yearning for slumber. If you were an insomniac in that era without our modern sleep aids or understanding of sleep hygiene, you probably wouldn't survive the sheer frustration and the weirdness of some of the proposed cures without developing a very dark sense of humor or perhaps just a deeper level of exhaustion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's like winding up a particularly soothing clockwork sleep machine, and it truly helps the channel reach other weary souls in need of a gentle historical distraction. And as always, I'd love to see where you're tuning in from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always a quiet comfort to know we're all sharing this peaceful space together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself now in the midst of the Victorian age, that long stretch from roughly the 1830s to the dawn of the 20th century, a period named for Queen Victoria of Great Britain, but whose cultural influence spread far and wide. It was an era of immense change and contradiction. Breathtaking scientific and industrial progress thundered alongside deeply entrenched social conventions. Great wealth and empire grew amidst widespread poverty and social unrest, and a fervent belief in reason and order coexisted with a pervasive undercurrent of anxiety, nervousness, and a fascination with the unseen. And one of the things many Victorians, particularly those in the burgeoning towns and cities, seemed to be losing was their sleep. Imagine the urban landscape of a great Victorian city like London or Manchester. The air is often thick with the smell of coal smoke, a gritty yellow-gray fog, the infamous pea souper, frequently blurring the edges of the world. The sounds are a cacophony quite different from our own. The incessant clatter of iron-rimmed carriage wheels and horses' hooves on cobblestone streets. The cries of street vendors, the distant rumble and hiss of factory machinery that might run late into the night, and the piercing shriek of railway whistles. Inside your home, the new marvel of gaslighting has extended the day, pushing back the natural boundaries of darkness. But this gaslight, while brighter than candles or oil lamps, often flickers, hisses, and consumes the oxygen in poorly ventilated rooms, sometimes giving off a faint, vaguely unsettling odor. So if you think your neighbor's enthusiastic late-night karaoke sessions, or that persistently blinking modem light in your bedroom, are bad for your sleep hygiene, just try to imagine attempting to catch some quality Z's with a coal-fired factory, puffing away down the street. Gas lamps audibly hissing in your hallway, and the constant nagging worry that your tightly laced corset is probably restricting your vital organs. Sweet dreams, under such circumstances, were for many less a nightly occurrence and more of a wistful aspirational goal. Beyond the physical environment, the Victorian mind itself was often a rather restless place. This was an age of profound and rapid social transformation. The Industrial Revolution was reshaping not just how people worked, but where they lived, how families were structured, and even how they perceived time itself. Old certainties were crumbling. New scientific ideas were challenging long-held religious beliefs, and the pressures of maintaining respectability within strict, often unforgiving social codes could be immense. It's no wonder that the 19th century has often been dubbed the century of nerves, a condition known as neurasthenia, a sort of catch-all term for nervous exhaustion. Anxiety, depression, and a host of vaguely defined symptoms, including very prominently insomnia, became almost epidemic, particularly among the middle and upper classes who had the leisure to fret and the means to consult an ever-growing number of medical practitioners. Indeed, it's a significant mainstream historical fact that insomnia, or wakefulness as it was very commonly termed by the Victorians, became a widely recognized and extensively discussed medical and social concern during the 19th century. Numerous medical treatises, popular health manuals, Magazine articles and lengthy letters to the editor were dedicated to dissecting its supposed causes and proposing an astonishing array of cures. This reflects not just a medicalization of sleep problems, but a growing societal anxiety about the importance of sleep for health, productivity, and moral well-being in an increasingly demanding and fast-paced world. Their idea of a relaxing bedtime routine might involve diligently reading a morally uplifting but terrifyingly long pamphlet on the dangers of nervous prostration and the perils of an overstimulated brain, all by the unsteady flickering light of a single gas jet. It's hardly surprising they couldn't sleep. They were probably far too busy being anxiously virtuous and worrying about their overstimulated brains. Contemporary descriptions of insomnia from Victorian diaries and letters paint a vivid picture of their nocturnal torment. The racing thoughts that refuse to be stilled, the anxious palpitations of the heart, the physical discomfort of stuffy bedrooms or lumpy mattresses, the sheer frustration of lying awake for hours while the rest of the household slumbered. Listening to the grandfather clock in the hall, slowly, inexorably chiming away the precious hours of darkness. The Victorians were so pervasively worried about everything, from the spiritual state of their immortal souls to the less than spiritual state of their often rather primitive household sewers. It's frankly a miracle anyone ever managed to get a decent night's sleep at all. They probably felt they had collectively invented insomnia just so they'd have more dedicated, uninterrupted time to fret properly about the universe. A quirky tidbit that gives us a little insight into their nocturnal anxieties is the widespread Victorian fear of being buried alive. This phobia, known as tapophobia, was so prevalent that safety coffins were actually designed and patented equipped with Bell's flags or breathing tubes, just in case one merely appeared to be deceased and then inconveniently woke up 6 feet under. While not directly an insomnia cure, it certainly speaks to a level of nighttime anxiety that would keep anyone tossing and turning. Another common piece of folk wisdom, or perhaps anxious speculation, attributed insomnia to seemingly innocuous things like eating cheese too late at night, a belief that still lingers, or indulging in overly exciting or sensational novels just before bedtime. Historians who study Victorian medicine and society still debate whether the 19th century genuinely experienced a significantly higher prevalence of insomnia compared to previous historical ages, or if it was more a case of increased awareness, medicalization, and more widespread public discussion of sleeplessness. This shift was likely fueled by factors such as the growth of a literate middle class, with access to a burgeoning print culture, newspapers, magazines, books discussing health, and a medical profession increasingly keen to define and treat these modern afflictions of the nerves. So you find yourself in this gaslit, often noisy, and decidedly anxious Victorian world, lying awake in your heavily draped four-poster bed. The silence of your room is oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic tick-tock of that ever-present clock, and perhaps the distant, mournful cry of a night watchman. Sleep feels like a distant, unattainable shore. It is this very desperation, this widespread yearning for the sweet relief of unconsciousness that created a fertile market for a bewildering array of supposed cures. From soothing syrups to strange dietary regimens, and most fascinatingly for our sleepy exploration tonight, a whole host of curious and inventive gadgets. Our journey will now begin to uncover these mechanical marvels, these Victorian-era gadgets designed to lure or perhaps even compel slumber. We've just settled into the shadowy, gaslit ambiance of a Victorian night, keenly aware of the anxieties and the environmental clamor that so often banished sleep from the weary city dweller. That palpable sense of restlessness, that yearning for peaceful oblivion, wasn't just a fleeting discomfort. It was a widespread concern, a symptom of what many Victorians themselves called the Age of Nerves. And in this remarkable era, an age that simultaneously worshipped at the altar of scientific progress and grappled with profound societal upheaval, the solutions proposed for this epidemic of sleeplessness were often as inventive and steam-powered as the period itself. Imagine you are living through this time of immense transformation. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing, reshaping not just the landscape with its factories and railways, but also the very pace and rhythm of life. Cities are swelling, new technologies are appearing with bewildering speed, and the old familiar ways are giving way to a future that feels both exhilarating and deeply unsettling. This constant barrage of change, this pressure to adapt and succeed in a rapidly industrializing world, took its toll on the Victorian Constitution. Nervous disorders, neurasthenia, hysteria, the vapors. These terms were commonplace, describing a constellation of symptoms that often included chronic anxiety, fatigue, digestive troubles, and of course our old friend insomnia. Your nerves, it was believed, could become frayed, overstimulated, or weakened by the relentless demands of modern existence. But this was also an age of boundless optimism and the power of human ingenuity. If humanity could conquer distance with the steam locomotive, send messages instantaneously across continents with the telegraph, and illuminate cities with gaslight, then surely it was reasoned these same inventive faculties could be turned inwards to soothe the troubled mind and regulate the disordered body. There was a pervasive belief that for every problem, a clever mechanical device or a new scientific application could surely provide the solution. If a machine could weave intricate patterns in cotton or power a colossal ocean liner, why couldn't a precisely engineered gadget regulate your nervous energy, calm your racing thoughts, or gently lull you into a state of blissful unconsciousness? The Victorians had a gadget for practically everything, or at least they were very keen on trying to invent one. Got a persistent cough, madam? We have a marvelous new steam-powered atomizing inhaler for that. Feeling a bit down in the dumps, sir? Allow me to demonstrate this handsome clockwork patent cheer-up device. And for that most vexing problem of sleeplessness, step right this way, for we have a dazzling array of spring-loaded, magnetically aligned, and even mildly electrically enhanced patented slumber inducers guaranteed. Guarantee not actually legally binding or based on any real science to restore your nocturnal peace. This faith in mechanical solutions often led to the human body itself being viewed, at least metaphorically, as a kind of intricate machine. A machine that, if not functioning perfectly, could perhaps be tuned, regulated, or gently nudged back into harmonious operation with the right external appliance. If your insomnia was caused by an overactive brain or congested blood vessels, perhaps a device could be fashioned to draw the excess energy away from your head. If your nerves were jangled, maybe a machine could soothe them with rhythmic motion or a gentle curative force like electricity or magnetism. Their general approach to well-being was often wonderfully, if somewhat alarmingly, proactive. If it whirs, clicks, buzzes, or gives you a mild yet somehow invigorating little shock, it's probably doing you a world of good. Safety features and double-blind placebo-controlled trials. Those were charmingly quaint considerations for a much later and arguably far less inventive century. Impressive polished brass fittings and a reassuringly hefty instruction manual filled with scientific-sounding jargon, however, absolutely essential for any self-respecting Victorian health gadget. This enthusiasm for mechanical cures was further fueled by the growing prestige of science, even as pseudoscience often flourished alongside it, sometimes indistinguishably. New discoveries in fields like electricity and magnetism were capturing the public imagination. And inventors, both genuine and opportunistic, were quick to try and harness these mysterious forces for therapeutic purposes. Gadgets promising to cure insomnia and often a dozen other ailments besides were frequently marketed with a veneer of scientific respectability. They came with elaborate diagrams, complex-sounding operational principles, and often glowing testimonials from eminent physicians, learned professors, or grateful recovered patients, the veracity of which could be, shall we say, somewhat variable. It's a significant mainstream historical fact that the Victorian era witnessed an explosion in the patenting, manufacturing, and marketing of a vast array of health appliances and therapeutic gadgets. Many of these claim to cure a wide spectrum of ailments, with nervous disorders and insomnia being particularly popular targets, by purportedly applying principles drawn from the exciting new sciences of electricity and magnetism, or from elaborate theories about ventilation, circulation, or hydraulics, often with little to no robust scientific basis for their efficacy in treating the advertised conditions. So why were people so drawn to these often rather strange contraptions? Desperation certainly played a large part. If you've ever suffered from a prolonged bout of insomnia, you know that you'll eventually try almost anything for a few hours of peace. There was also that powerful Victorian belief in progress and the inherent goodness of modern technological solutions. A tangible physical gadget, something you could see and operate, often felt like a more active and potent intervention than simply being told to adjust your diet or take a calming walk. And for some, these mechanical aids might have offered a welcome alternative or perhaps a supplement to the often heavy-handed and addictive drugs like opium laudanum or bromides that were also commonly prescribed for sleeplessness. A quirky tidbit that exemplifies this inventive, if sometimes misguided spirit can be found in theories related to early ideas about phrenology. The belief that the shape of the skull revealed one's character and mental faculties. Some inventors and health theorists posited that specific sleep bumps or somnolence centers on the human skull could be gently yet persistently stimulated by precisely calibrated spring-loaded headbands or padded skull caps. These devices, it was claimed, promised the suffering insomniac direct mechanical access to the brain's elusive slumber center. A center which, unfortunately for them and their customers, modern neuroscience has yet to definitively locate in quite that conveniently accessible bump-like form. Historians who delve into the medical marketplace of the 19th century often debate whether the remarkable Victorian enthusiasm for these myriad therapeutic gadgets was primarily driven by a genuine, albeit sometimes comically misguided scientific optimism, and a sincere desire for empirical, tangible solutions to distressing health problems. Or they question, was it perhaps more heavily fueled by incredibly canny marketing strategies, widespread public anxiety about health in a rapidly changing world, and a broader societal fascination with novelty, mechanical ingenuity, and the allure of anything that sounded even vaguely scientific furthermore. The precise role of the patient-doctor relationship in the widespread adoption of these peculiar gadgets is also a complex area of study. Were doctors actively prescribing these devices based on a perceived or hoped-for efficacy, or were increasingly empowered middle-class patients demanding access to these modern technological interventions they read about in popular journals? It was likely a frothy, bubbling, steam-powered mix of all these factors. You truly have to admire their boundless optimism and their relentless inventive spirit. My nerves are completely shot from the relentless, clangorous progress of this glorious industrial age. I know I shall invent an even more complicated, possibly steam-assisted clockwork gadget to fix it. It's the quintessential Victorian circle of inventive, if occasionally perplexing life. This prevailing mindset, this unique blend of anxiety and almost unshakable faith in mechanical solutions, created the perfect environment for the proliferation of all sorts of weird and wonderful insomnia cures. Having set this rather restless stage, we are now ready to begin our gentle exploration of the first major category of these fascinating contraptions, those that sought to harness the mysterious, newly fashionable, and often quite shocking power of electricity. We've just settled into that uniquely Victorian mindset, an age brimming with anxiety about nerves, and yet overflowing with an almost unshakable faith in the power of steam gears and inventive ingenuity to solve just about any human ailment, including that pervasive torment of sleeplessness. This belief certainly paved the way for a dazzling and sometimes bewildering array of mechanical sleep aids. But before we start plugging in those early electrotherapy devices or winding up the clockwork rocking beds, it's worth taking a moment to acknowledge that these gadgets weren't the only recourse for the weary Victorian insomniac. Alongside and often predating or supplementing these mechanical marvels was a whole apothecary shelf, groaning with potions, powders, and pills, all promising the sweet oblivion of sleep. Imagine you're a sleepless soul in, say, 1870. Your nerves are frayed, your brain is whirring, and the gaslight outside your window seems to mock your wakefulness. Before you'd necessarily invest in a complicated piece of bedroom machinery, you or your doctor might well reach for a bottle. The Victorian era was absolutely awash with patent medicines, tonics, elixirs, and syrups, many of which whispered promises of calm nerves and profound, unbroken slumber. So before they even considered inventing the electric sleep-inducing corset of delightful dreams, the go-to Victorian solution for a restless night was often something much simpler, if not necessarily safer. Just imbibe this rather mysterious, probably brownish and quite possibly treacly liquid that your esteemed physician, or perhaps just the very persuasive advertisement in your penny. Dreadful recommended. What could possibly go wrong? Chief among these liquid sleep aids, and indeed, one of the most widely used substances in the entire Victorian pharmacopoeia, was opium and its various derivatives. Laudanum, an alcoholic tincture of opium, was the superstar here. It is a crucial and sobering mainstream historical fact that opiates, particularly laudanum, were extensively and often casually used in the Victorian era for an astonishingly vast array of medical complaints, from coughs, colds, and diarrhea to teething pain in infants, general aches, anxiety, women's troubles, and most significantly for our purposes, insomnia and nervous conditions. For much of the 19th century, laudanum was readily available, often without a prescription from any chemist shop. It was cheap, it was effective, at least in the short term, for inducing a kind of stupor, and its use was for a long time quite socially acceptable across different classes. Preparations like Godfrey's cordial or Mother Bailey's quieting syrup, popular for soothing fretful babies and sometimes their equally fretful parents, or even adults seeking a cheap high or a night's sleep, frequently contained significant amounts of opium. The labels on their patent medicine bottles were often truly amazing feats of optimistic marketing. Professor Pemberton's perfect poppy panacea cures sleeplessness, nervous agitation, bad humors, existential dread, indigestion, and probably makes your prize-winning petunias grow back fuller and brighter too, all for the low price of 1 shilling. The original clickbait, but printed on a charmingly illustrated glass bottle. As the century wore on, the devastatingly addictive nature of opium and its derivatives like morphine became increasingly and alarmingly apparent. This led to a search for supposedly safer alternatives. One such substance that gained popularity later in the century was chloral hydrate. Introduced as a sedative and hypnotic, it was initially hailed as a miracle non-opiate sleep inducer. However, it too proved to be highly addictive and extremely dangerous in overdose, gaining a rather notorious reputation in some circles and contributing to more than a few tragic accidental deaths. Then there were the bromides, such as potassium bromide or sodium bromide. These salts were introduced around the mid-19th century and became widely prescribed as sedatives and anticonvulsants. They were believed to calm nervous excitement and cerebral irritation, thereby promoting sleep. While they could indeed induce a state of drowsiness, prolonged use led to a rather unpleasant toxic condition known as bromism. Characterized by skin rashes, digestive issues, and severe neurological and psychological symptoms, like depression, confusion, and even psychosis. Not exactly conducive to a truly restful or rejuvenating slumber in the long run. Of course, simpler and more traditional remedies were also in use. Alcohol, a tot of brandy, a glass of port, a heavy stout, was often recommended as a nightcap to help one drift off, though. The Victorians, like many before and since, were largely unaware of how alcohol actually disrupts healthy sleep architecture, often leading to fragmented and unrefreshing rest. And then there were the herbal preparations. Pillows stuffed with dried hops, teas brewed from valerian root, or chamomile flowers, and the scent of lavender were all employed in the age-old quest for sleep. These were generally seen as gentler and safer, though their efficacy obviously varied greatly. The trouble was many of those commercially available herbal sleep tonics or vegetable nerve soothers often had a little something extra blended in, a generous helping of alcohol or a subtle dash of laudanum to ensure the customer felt some effect. A quirky tidbit from the era is the sheer inventiveness of the names and claims for some of these patent sleep potions. One might encounter advertisements for Sir Reginald Fortescue's Royal Somnific Elixir of Balmy Repose, which, according to its label, was compounded from rare botanical essences gathered by moonlight on the slopes of the Himalayas by trained ascetics and endorsed by a minor European potentate name, withheld for discretion. The secret ingredient, if you could analyze it, was probably 90% cheap sherry and a hopeful dash of valerian, but oh, the romance of it. So, why did people turn so readily to these potions, despite the often dubious claims and increasingly apparent dangers? Well, the desire for immediate relief from the misery of insomnia is a powerful motivator. These substances were often readily available either over the counter or through a quick consultation with a doctor who might have few other effective tools for dealing with nerves. And for herbal remedies, there was the comfort of tradition. Historians of medicine often debate the extent to which Victorian physicians were genuinely aware of, or perhaps chose to overlook the highly addictive properties of substances like opiates and bromides when they first began prescribing them so widely for sleep and anxiety. How much was their promotion influenced by the rapidly burgeoning pharmaceutical industry of the time, which was eager to market these new and powerful compounds? Furthermore, the social stratification of drug use for insomnia is also a topic of ongoing interest. Were opiates and the newer chemical sedatives more commonly used by the middle and upper classes, who could afford repeated doctor's visits, while poorer individuals perhaps relied more on cheaper patent remedies? Alcohol or traditional herbal preparations? You have to imagine the Victorian insomniac's thought process lying there in the dark, desperate for relief. This rather alarming dose of laudanum isn't quite doing the trick for my persistent wakefulness anymore. Perhaps if I take it whilst simultaneously wearing a gently humming electric belt around my waist and having my head gently cooled by that new spring-loaded cerebral refrigeration cap I saw advertised in The Lancet. Yes, that combination might just be the ticket to dreamland. This landscape of readily available, often potent, and sometimes perilous potions is the crucial backdrop against which the Victorian fascination with mechanical sleep gadgets emerged. Perhaps it was the very side effects and dangers of these drugs that spurred some inventors and physicians and their patients to seek out safer, more natural, or at least more scientifically modern, non-chemical solutions. Or perhaps for many, it wasn't an either-or situation. They might well have been taking their nightly dose of bromide and hopefully strapping on a magnetic corset just to cover all the bases. Having now briefly acknowledged the pervasive presence of these liquid and powdered sleep aids, we can appreciate even more the allure that a tangible mechanical and often impressively scientific-sounding gadget held for the sleepless Victorian. Our next step will be to delve into the first major category of these fascinating contraptions, those that sought to harness the newly discovered and often quite shocking power of electricity to woo the stubborn Sandman. We've just taken a rather sobering sniff of the various potions and potent chemical drafts that Victorian insomniacs often turn to in their desperate search for sleep. From the pervasive laudanum to the promising but problematic chloral hydrate and bromides. While these substances certainly offered a path to oblivion for some of their increasingly recognized dangers and addictive properties, likely spurred many to seek out what they hoped would be cleaner, safer, and perhaps even more scientifically advanced solutions. And what force was more emblematic of scientific progress and mysterious power in the 19th century than the crackling, invisible, and utterly fascinating phenomenon of electricity? So let's now gently plug ourselves into the world of Victorian electrotherapy and encounter the bizarre, sometimes shocking gadgets that promised a jolt into dreamland. Imagine yourself living in an era when electricity was transforming the world before your very eyes. The telegraph was beginning to string continents together with invisible messages. Michael Faraday was dazzling audiences with his electrical demonstrations, and towards the latter part of the century, the first glimmers of electric lighting were starting to push back the gaslit gloom in public spaces and wealthy homes. Electricity was new, it was exciting, it was almost magical. It was seen by many not just as a source of power for machines, but as a kind of vital life force, a mysterious fluid that could animate, invigorate, and, if properly applied, surely heal. This led to a veritable craze for electrification in health, with inventors and entrepreneurs rushing to channel this wondrous energy into all manner of therapeutic devices. Their answer to a sleepless, fretful night was essentially, "Well, old chap, have you considered just passing a small, invigorating trickle of lightning through your person?" Very gently, of course. What could possibly be more natural and profoundly soothing than that? The Victorian spa day one imagines sounds uniquely electrifying. The science behind using electrotherapy for insomnia was, as you might expect, a bit sparky and often quite speculative. The prevailing idea was that nerves, those culprits behind so much Victorian malaise, were essentially intricate electrical pathways within the body. If your nerves were deemed to be weak, sluggish, or unbalanced, all common diagnoses for the insomniac, then a mild, carefully applied electric current could, it was reasoned, recharge your depleted nervous system, soothe overexcited pathways, or rebalance your vital energies. It was also believed by some that electricity could improve blood circulation, calm those troublesome heart palpitations that often accompanied sleeplessness, or even directly act upon the brain's supposed sleep centers, gently coaxing them into action. This led to the development of a truly astonishing array of electrotherapy gadgets designed specifically for home use, promising to bring the miracle of electric slumber right to your bedside. Perhaps the most ubiquitous of these were electric belts. It's a significant mainstream historical fact that electric belts and bands, typically constructed with small voltaic piles discs of zinc and copper, separated by moistened pads or sometimes more sophisticated induction coils to generate a weak current, were widely advertised and sold throughout the Victorian era as veritable cure-alls. They were promoted for everything from indigestion and sluggish liver to back pain, sexual debility, nervous exhaustion, and naturally insomnia. You'd strap one of these contraptions around your waist, your chest, or sometimes even more intimate areas, and it would supposedly deliver a gentle, continuous, life-enhancing current through your body as you slept or tried to. Then there were devices designed for more direct cranial application. Electric headbands or caps were popular, fitted with electrodes intended to apply the current directly to the scalp. The idea was that an overactive or congested brain, a common supposed cause of insomnia, could be calmed and soothed by this gentle electrical ministration. Imagine the delightful Victorian bedtime ritual. Step 1. Don your patented cerebral calmer, electric nightcap, ensuring the electrodes are snugly against your temples. Step 2. Try not to think too deeply about the fact you've effectively got a small homemade battery pack strapped directly to your head. Step 3. Enjoy immediate and profound slumber, or possibly just a faint, inexplicable buzzing sensation behind your eyeballs and a curious metallic taste in your mouth. If a full head cap seemed a bit much, you could opt for an electric hairbrush. Briskly brushing your hair and scalp with one of these devices before bed was said to stimulate circulation, invigorate the nerves of the head in a pleasingly soporific way, and send that vitalizing current right where it was needed. Dr. Scott's electric flesh brush, for instance, a very popular brand, not only promised to cure insomnia by equalizing the vital currents of the body through vigorous scalp stimulation, but also boldly claimed to prevent baldness, cure headaches, and even eradicate dandruff, a true triple or quadruple threat of delightful electrical optimism. Some inventors even conceived of electropathic beds or pillows, supposedly wired in some ingenious way to envelop the entire slumbering or hopefully slumbering body in a gentle therapeutic electrical field throughout the night. And for those who enjoyed a good soak, smaller home-use versions of galvanic baths became available, allowing you to pass a weak electric current through your foot bath or even a small hip bath, all in the name of electrifying your way to a good night's rest. Now, the advertisements for these devices almost invariably stressed the mild, soothing, pleasant, or even imperceptible nature of the electric current. However, the reality could sometimes be a bit more stimulating. Depending on the device, its state of repair, the dampness of the conducting pads, and the user's own sensitivity, the sensation could range from a gentle warmth or a faint tingle to quite distinct prickling or even mild unexpected shocks. You do have to wonder if anyone in their sleepy fumbling accidentally set their patent electric bed to the wake up and perform a vigorous Highland fling mode instead of the gentle slumber current. That would certainly cure your immediate desire for sleep, though it might perhaps replace it with a sudden, inexplicable enthusiasm for tartan and bagpipes. One of the appeals of these devices was that many were designed for domestic electropathy, empowering the individual to take their cure into their own hands in the privacy of their own bedroom. No need for constant, expensive visits to a specialist. You could be your own electrotherapist. Historians and medical historians often debate the extent to which any perceived benefits from these myriad Victorian electrotherapy gadgets were actually due to the physiological effects of electricity itself, or whether they were more attributable to the powerful placebo effect. The novelty of the treatment, a simple counter-irritant effect, where a mild sensation distracts from other discomforts, or perhaps even in some rare instances, genuinely, if accidentally, stimulating certain nerve pathways in a way that was mildly relaxing or sleep-inducing for some particularly suggestible individuals. Furthermore, the line between legitimate, albeit primitive and often misguided medical experimentation with electricity by serious physicians and scientists and outright quackery in the enthusiastic promotion of these cure-all electric devices by less scrupulous entrepreneurs was often incredibly blurry and difficult to discern, both for the Victorians themselves and for us looking back. As you imagine trying one of these devices, picture the scene, the faint, almost imperceptible hum or crackle. It might emit the cool metallic feel of electrodes against your skin, perhaps a faint sharp smell of ozone in the air, the weight of an electric belt buckled around you, or the slightly unnerving sight of all those intricate brass dials, coiled wires, and mysterious ebony handles on a more elaborate machine by your bedside. It was all part of the Victorian era's deep fascination with harnessing the unseen forces of nature, a belief that even something as elusive as sleep could be coaxed or perhaps gently zapped into submission. Having now been mildly electrified, our next stop on this tour of Victorian sleep aids will involve another invisible mysterious force that captured their imagination magnetism. We've just had a rather stimulating tour through the world of Victorian electrotherapy, where the mysterious crackle of electricity was earnestly, if often misguidedly, applied in the hope of shocking or perhaps gently coaxing the insomniac into slumber. But electricity wasn't the only invisible, all-pervading force that captured the Victorian imagination and promised a pathway to peaceful nights. If zapping yourself with a battery pack didn't quite appeal, or perhaps if it just made your hair stand on end without actually helping you drift off, there was another equally fashionable and scientific force you could turn to: magnetism. So let's now gently realign ourselves and explore the curious magnetic corsets bands and other contraptions designed to literally pull you towards the land of dreams. Much like electricity, magnetism was a source of immense wonder and scientific inquiry in the 19th century. The simple, unwavering guidance of a ship's compass, the mysterious pull of a lodestone, these were tangible proofs of a powerful, unseen force at play in the universe. Earlier in the century, Franz Mesmer's theories of animal magnetism, the idea of a vital magnetic fluid flowing through all living beings, had caused a sensation, even if mainstream science eventually debunked many of his specific claims. Nevertheless, the notion that magnetism played a crucial role in health and vitality lingered powerfully in the public consciousness. If this invisible force could guide ships and lift iron, surely it could influence the delicate workings of the human body, especially those troublesome nerves that seem to be at the root of so much Victorian sleeplessness. So, if zapping yourself with a mild electrical current wasn't quite your preferred cup of bedtime tea for curing insomnia, how about just meticulously sticking a carefully arranged series of magnets to various parts of your person? The Victorians, it seems, truly believed in the attractive power of a good night's sleep. Quite literally in this case, the scientific theory underpinning magnetotherapy for insomnia was, as you might expect, just as wonderfully vague and hopefully optimistic as that for electrotherapy. The general idea was that the human body possessed its own intrinsic magnetic field, or perhaps delicate magnetic fluids, that needed to remain in perfect balance and harmony. Illnesses, including those pesky nervous disorders that led to insomnia, were thought to arise from a disruption or an imbalance in this personal bodily magnetism, or perhaps from a poor alignment with the Earth's own much grander magnetic field. Therefore, the logical solution, if you were a Victorian inventor with a keen interest in magnets and a desire to tap into the lucrative insomniac market, was to apply external magnets to the afflicted individual. These magnets, it was claimed, could restore the natural magnetic equilibrium, harmonize the vital currents, soothe agitated nerves by some unseen calming influence, or even draw out the morbid affections or impurities that were supposedly causing the sleeplessness. This led to a delightful proliferation of wearable magnetic gadgets designed to envelop the wearer in a gentle, healing magnetic aura. Magnetic corsets became quite the vogue. Imagine your already rather restrictive Victorian corset, but now with the added bonus of strategically placed magnets sewn into its fabric. These weren't just designed to achieve that fashionable hourglass figure. They were for an hourglass figure that also slept soundly, remained free from nervous prostration, and probably as an added magnetic benefit, never lost its steel sewing needles. Multitasking at its Victorian finest. You could wear it during the day to maintain your magnetic balance, and some particularly dedicated individuals might even keep it on, perhaps slightly loosened at night, hoping its constant magnetic caress would ensure peaceful repose. Similar to the electric belts we encountered, magnetic belts and bands were also incredibly popular. These could be strapped around the waist, the chest, the limbs, or any other body part deemed to be in need of magnetic realignment. Instead of batteries, they contained rows of magnets, often arranged with specific polarities facing the body, all promising to soothe, invigorate, or otherwise magnetically improve your well-being, and most importantly, your sleep. For those whose insomnia was blamed on an overactive brain or too much blood in the head, magnetic insoles or special magnetic socks were marketed with the claim that they would draw the nervous energy downwards, away from the excitable brain, promoting a state of cerebral calm, perfect for drifting off. You could also find magnetic vests, magnetic garters, magnetic necklaces, and even magnetic finger rings. Almost any item of apparel or jewelry, it seemed, could be enhanced with the mysterious, sleep-inducing power of magnetism. It is a well-documented mainstream historical fact that following the earlier popularization of Mesmer's theories of animal magnetism and the concurrent advancements in the scientific understanding of electromagnetism, the 19th century witnessed a significant surge in the development and marketing of various magnetic therapies and wearable magnetic devices. These items were widely promoted, often with extravagant claims and glowing testimonials, as cures for an extensive list of ailments, prominently including nervous disorders, rheumatism, digestive issues, and of course, persistent insomnia, all based on the central premise of restoring the body's natural magnetic balance or vital energy. The language used to describe how these magnets supposedly worked was often delightfully nebulous and reassuringly scientific sounding. They were said to exert a soothing magnetic influence, create a harmonious flow of vital fluids, induce calming vibrations within the nervous system, or gently draw out morbid affections from the body like a magnetic poultice. The exact mechanisms were rarely explained with any degree of scientific rigor, but the conviction with which these claims were made, coupled with the public's fascination with this invisible force, proved to be a powerful marketing combination. A quirky tidbit that highlights the elaborate pseudoscience often involved is the design of some of these magnetic garments. Certain more expensive magnetic belts or corsets didn't just contain random magnets. They featured intricately mapped and specifically labeled arrangements of North Pole-facing and South Pole-facing magnets. Detailed instruction booklets would accompany these devices, explaining precisely which pole needed to be aligned with which organ or part of the body to achieve the desired magnetic flushing of impurities, or the optimal polarization of one's nervous system for restful sleep. It was like a tiny wearable magnetic spa treatment with very specific, if entirely unproven, directional therapy and a delightful illusion of personalized scientific precision. Historians of science and medicine often debate whether the considerable popularity of these magnetic therapies in the Victorian era was primarily a testament to the public's earnest desire for gentle, non-invasive treatments, especially when compared to the often harsh purgatives, bleedings, or addictive drugs of the time, or if it primarily capitalized on the era's general fascination with mysterious, invisible forces and the persuasive, almost hypnotic, power of pseudoscientific jargon and confident advertising. Furthermore, the overlap and sometimes the deliberate conflation between electrical and magnetic therapies in Victorian public understanding and marketing materials is a complex area. Both were often presented as related vital forces, and some devices even claim to offer the combined benefits of both electricity and magnetism, a true double whammy of invisible healing power. As you imagine trying on one of these magnetic marvels, picture the slight, almost imperceptible pull, or the subtle added weight of the hidden magnets sewn into your clothing. Feel the coolness of the metal against your skin if you wore a magnetic band. Visualize those impressive diagrams in the advertisements showing invisible lines of magnetic force flowing harmoniously through your now perfectly balanced and sleep-ready body. You really do have to wonder if anyone wearing a full ensemble of Victorian magnetic sleepwear, perhaps a magnetic corset, magnetic socks, a magnetic nightcap, and magnetic garters, ever found themselves inexplicably stuck to their cast-iron bedstead in the morning. Darling, I seem to be powerfully and rather inconveniently aligned with the Earth's North Pole, and also with this rather ornate bed frame. Could you perhaps fetch a very strong non-magnetic spatula and possibly breakfast in bed? The allure of magnetism, like that of electricity, was its promise of a modern scientific, yet somehow natural way to restore balance and invite sleep without resorting to those increasingly suspect potions. Having now explored the gentle or not so gentle pull of these magnetic cures, our next sleepy stop will be to investigate how the Victorians tried to engineer the very air you breathed in your bedroom all in the relentless pursuit of a good night's rest. We've just gently untangled ourselves from the rather curious embrace of Victorian magnetic corsets and belts, those hopeful attempts to align one's bodily energies and literally pull down the sweet relief of sleep, using the mysterious power of magnetism. If being gently zapped by an electric current, or subtly polarized by hidden magnets, wasn't quite your cup of Darjeeling tea, fear not, for the inventive Victorian mind had plenty more avenues to explore in its relentless quest to conquer insomnia. Having tackled invisible forces, our attention now shifts to something a little more tangible, yet equally vital for health and slumber, the very air you breathed in your bedroom. So let's take a deep cleansing and hopefully scientifically managed breath as we investigate the fascinating world of Victorian ventilating gadgets. You see, the Victorians were not without reason quite preoccupied with the quality of the air around them. This was the era of the miasma theory of disease, the widely held belief that many illnesses from cholera to consumption, and even less dramatic afflictions like headaches, nervous debility, and yes, persistent sleeplessness were caused by bad air or miasmata. These noxious vapors were thought to emanate from decaying organic matter, stagnant water, overcrowded urban slums, faulty drains, and generally unsanitary conditions. A stuffy, poorly ventilated bedroom, therefore, was not just uncomfortable. It was seen as a potential breeding ground for ill health and a direct impediment to restful sleep. You're lying there in your heavily draped four-poster bed, the windows probably shut tight against the night chill, and the notorious pea super fog outside, and the air in the room is getting, well, a bit lived in. The Victorians would have called it vitiated, depleted of its vital properties and full of exhaled carbonic acid, carbon dioxide, and other bodily effluvia. Not exactly the recipe for sweet dreams. This led to a fervent quest for pure air within the domestic sanctuary of the bedroom. There was a growing understanding of the importance of fresh air for overall health, but this was often tempered by a deep-seated fear of drafts. Cold night air, which itself was often considered unhealthy, potentially carrying its own malaria or bad airs, and the general dampness of the British climate. So the challenge was not just to get fresh air in, but to do so in a controlled, scientific manner, without admitting those dreaded chills or airborne impurities. This desire for perfectly managed bedroom air spurred the invention of a host of ingenious and sometimes wonderfully over-engineered ventilating contraptions. The Victorians were so deeply concerned about the perils of bad air that their ideal bedroom probably had more specialized ventilation gadgets than a modern-day high-tech server room. Is that a gentle, scientifically approved, health-giving zephyr I feel, my dear? Or did I inadvertently leave the patent atmospheric reoxygenator and miasma expurgator Mark III on the brisk gale force setting again? One common category of these devices was the window ventilator. These weren't just simple cracks in the window. Oh no, that would be far too haphazard. Victorian window ventilators were often quite elaborate affairs designed to be fitted into existing sash windows or above them. Some featured adjustable louvers or baffles to control the direction and volume of incoming air, attempting to diffuse it gently into the room rather than creating a direct draft. Others incorporated screens made of fine wire mesh muslin or even charcoal-impregnated fabric supposedly to filter out dust soot and those dreaded miasmatic particles. Some particularly ambitious models even claimed to ozonize or medicate the incoming air as it passed through, infusing it with health-giving properties. Then there were chimney or flue ventilators. Since most Victorian bedrooms would have had a fireplace, even if not always lit, inventors devised various cowls pipes and register grates designed to improve the natural draft up the chimney, thereby drawing stale, vitiated air out of the room and encouraging fresh air to be drawn in from elsewhere. Some of these were quite ornate, becoming a decorative as well as supposedly functional feature of the fireplace. Beyond just letting air in or out, some devices aimed to actively treat the air within the room. You might find early forms of portable air purifiers, humidifiers, or even dehumidifiers. These contraptions might involve passing the bedroom air over pans of water, sometimes medicated with carbolic acid or fragrant oils through layers of charcoal or lime, or over blocks of ice in summer, all in an effort to wash, filter, or otherwise correct its properties for optimal sleep. Some devices, often called aerators or ozonators, used chemical reactions or even electrical discharges, linking back to our previous theme to supposedly generate ozone or other vitalizing gases, which were believed by some to be highly beneficial for health, and particularly conducive to calming the nerves and promoting slumber. It's a well-documented mainstream historical fact that the Victorian era saw a significant focus on improving domestic ventilation as a crucial means of promoting public and private health and preventing the spread of disease. This led to the development, patenting, and active marketing of numerous types of window ventilators, air bricks, chimney flues, and other specialized devices designed to control, circulate, and purify the air within homes, with particular attention often paid to the perceived atmospheric quality of the bedroom. The scientific principles underpinning these gadgets were a blend of emerging understanding like the importance of oxygen and the dangers of carbon dioxide buildup in sealed rooms, and lingering, often flawed older theories like the miasma theory, or the precise benefits of ozone at breathable concentrations. Their ideal bedroom air was probably a carefully calibrated cocktail, scientifically pure yet retaining a charmingly rustic freshness with just a hint of invigorating ozone, but absolutely no actual drafts, and most importantly, entirely free from any suspicious, unwholesome smells emanating from next door's rather questionable Victorian plumbing. Achieving this delicate atmospheric balance was indeed a high bar for any single gadget to consistently reach. A quirky tidbit that illustrates the sometimes almost obsessive complexity of these inventions comes from looking at some of the patent diagrams. One particularly ambitious inventor, for example, proposed a bedroom telegraph ventilator, which through an elaborate system of external weather vanes connected by wires and pulleys to internal window sashes and baffles, would theoretically automatically adjust all the window openings and air deflectors in real time based on the prevailing wind direction and strength. The goal was to ensure a constant yet perfectly attempered and draft-free supply of fresh zephyrs all night long. A wonderfully optimistic, if mechanically nightmarish, piece of early Victorian smart home technology. You have to admire their sheer dedication to the cause. Most of us today might just crack a window a little or perhaps turn on an air purifier. The Victorians, they'd invent a 6-chambered counterweighted self-adjusting ventilation marvel with optional interchangeable pine-scented or lavender-infused filter cartridges. Because why ever make anything simple when you could make it magnificently, reassuringly, and scientifically complicated? Historians who study Victorian domestic technology and public health often debate how much the fervent obsession with bedroom ventilation was driven by genuine, empirically verifiable improvements in understanding airborne disease transmission, which was indeed advancing during this period, thanks to figures like Pasteur and Koch later in the century, versus being a more diffuse manifestation of broader societal anxieties about the perceived dangers of the rapidly growing urban environment, concerns about moral and physical degeneration, class distinctions. The fresh, wholesome air of the countryside versus the foul, corrupting air of the city slums, and an overarching Victorian desire to rationalize, sanitize, and control every aspect of the domestic environment through the application of scientific principles. Furthermore, the actual day-to-day effectiveness of many of these smaller domestic ventilating gadgets in significantly improving overall air quality within a typical Victorian home is often questionable. Some may have provided a degree of fresh air, others perhaps just created annoying drafts, or were too noisy or cumbersome for regular practical use, becoming just another piece of well-intentioned clutter. But as you lie there imagining your Victorian self in that carefully managed, or at least gadget-filled bedroom, perhaps you can feel a gentle, scientifically approved, or so the advertisement claimed, current of ozonized air wafting over your face from a contraption in the window. The air might smell faintly of carbolic, or perhaps of the damp charcoal in its filter. Whether it actually helped you sleep or not, it was a testament to the Victorian belief that even the very air you breathed could be engineered for your well-being. Having attempted to perfect the atmosphere around the insomniac, our next sleepy exploration will delve into gadgets designed to act more directly upon their body through gentle lulling motion. The fascinating world of mechanical rocking beds. We've just taken a rather invigorating, if slightly ozonized, breath of the scientifically managed air that Victorian inventors hoped would cure the sleepless masses. Having attempted to perfect the very atmosphere around the restless insomniac, From filtering out miasmas to infusing the air with vitalizing gases, the next logical step for these ingenious minds was to devise gadgets that acted more directly upon the body itself, not with invisible forces like electricity or magnetism this time, but with gentle, persuasive, and often quite elaborate physical motion. So let's now softly sway into the world of Victorian mechanical lullabies and explore the fascinating beds and contraptions designed to rock, vibrate, or gently jiggle their users into the land of Nod. The idea that rhythmic motion can induce sleep is, of course, as old as humanity itself. For millennia, parents have instinctively rocked fretful infants in their arms or in cradles, the gentle, repetitive sway a near-universal pathway to calm and slumber. The Victorians, with their characteristic blend of earnest belief in traditional wisdom and an almost boundless faith in the power of mechanization, simply sought to upscale this ancient principle for the adult insomniac. If it worked for babies, why not for their sleepless, nerve-wracked parents? So if diligently counting sheep breathing perfectly filtered and scientifically ozonized air and perhaps even wearing a full-body magnetic sleep suit didn't quite do the trick, the next logical step in the Victorian insomniac's arsenal was clearly, let's just build a giant adult-sized, preferably clockwork-powered baby rocker. The Victorians always thinking outside the often gently oscillating box. This led to the patenting and production of various mechanical rocking beds or cradles for adults. Imagine a sturdy Victorian bedstead perhaps made of handsome dark wood or even robust iron. But instead of being fixed firmly to the floor, it's built upon curved rockers or perhaps suspended within a larger frame like a gigantic cradle. The real ingenuity often lay in the mechanism designed to produce the rocking motion. Many of these relied on clockwork. You, or perhaps your long-suffering spouse or a dedicated servant, would wind up a substantial spring mechanism, much like a grandfather clock, and this would then provide a gentle rhythmic rocking or swaying motion for a set period, hopefully long enough for you to drift off. Some more ambitious designs might have even boasted adjustable speeds or different rocking patterns. Perhaps a gentle lapping wave, setting for mild restlessness, and a more vigorous ocean swell for truly stubborn cases of wakefulness. You have to wonder about the practicalities of that winding mechanism. One can almost hear the sleepy late-night Victorian bedroom conversation. "Excuse me, my dearest Algernon, whilst I appreciate the sentiment, could you perhaps give the patented Somnolent Swaymaster 3000 another good 20 or 30 cranks? I'm only feeling moderately lulled at the moment, and my nerves are still rather jangled." Romantic Victorian bedtime rituals indeed. As technology progressed later in the Victorian era, some inventors began to envision or even prototype beds that used more modern power sources. There were theoretical designs for steam-powered rocking beds, though the practicalities of having a miniature hissing coal-fired steam engine in your bedroom likely limited their widespread domestic appeal and possibly significantly increased the fire risk, which isn't terribly conducive to restful sleep. More plausibly, with the dawn of domestic electricity, electrically powered motors could be adapted to create more consistent and perhaps more controllable rocking, or intriguingly vibrating beds or mattresses. The idea here was that a gentle, pervasive vibration could soothe tense muscles, calm agitated nerves, and create a monotonous sensory input that would eventually lull the brain into submission. Of course, not all such devices were so high-tech. Simpler manually operated rocking mechanisms also existed, perhaps involving a long lever that the insomniac themselves or an attendant could gently push and pull to set the bed in motion. And while perhaps not strictly beds, some vibrating chairs or recliners were also marketed for their nerve-soothing properties, with the implication that a session of gentle mechanical vibration in the evening could prepare one for a more peaceful night's sleep. The theory behind these motion-based cures was fairly straightforward and drew on common-sense observations. The rhythmic, predictable motion was believed to have a generally soothing effect on the nervous system, much like the repetitive reassurance of a lullaby or the gentle swaying of trees in a breeze. It could help to calm an overstimulated mind, that common Victorian complaint. Gentle motion was also sometimes thought to improve circulation, preventing the congestion of blood in the brain that some theories blamed for wakefulness. And on a simpler level, the physical sensation of being rocked or vibrated might simply distract the insomniac from their anxious thoughts or bodily discomforts, allowing the natural processes of sleep to take over. It was an attempt to mimic those natural, comforting rhythms. The rocking of a cradle, the gentle sway of a ship at anchor. The feeling of being held and soothed. Various inventors in the 19th century, particularly in Britain and America, patented numerous designs for these therapeutic beds that incorporated rocking, oscillating, swinging, or vibrating mechanisms. These were often powered by intricate clockwork weighted pendulums or other ingenious mechanical means, all based on the prevailing principle that gentle, consistent, and rhythmic motion could effectively soothe the nerves, calm the mind, and induce natural sleep, very much akin to the age-old practice of rocking an infant. A quirky tidbit that showcases the sometimes almost fantastical elaboration of these devices comes from a few particularly ambitious patent applications. One such design from the late 1880s described a multi-sensory somnambulistic oscillating couch, which not only rocked gently from side to side, but also featured a subtle, continuous wave-like undulation running along its length from head to foot. As if that weren't enough, it boasted an optional, separately powered clockwork attachment for a slowly rotating canopy suspended above the bed, painted on its underside with calming pastoral scenes or even a starry night sky. And for the truly dedicated insomniac, a further optional module could release a gentle waft of lavender or hop-scented air at precisely timed intervals. It promised a complete immersive multi-sensory journey to dreamland. Or one suspects if any of the mechanisms malfunctioned or went slightly out of sync, possibly just a rather confusing and mildly nauseating experience. Imagine the sales pitch for that one. Tired of simply not sleeping? Try Dr. Phineas Quackenbush's patented perpetual motion panacea. Sleep Cradle gently rocks, sways, undulates, and visually transports you for up to 8 delightful hours on a single easy winding. Results, of course, may vary. May induce slight dizziness, a profound sense of existential wonder, or an inexplicable craving for warm milk and rusks. Historians of technology and Victorian social medicine often debate how widespread the actual use and domestic ownership of these more complex mechanical rocking or vibrating beds truly was versus their perhaps more frequent appearance in hopeful patent registers, optimistic advertisements in popular journals, or as showpieces at industrial exhibitions. Were they primarily expensive novelties purchased only by the very wealthy and eccentric, or did simpler, more affordable versions find broader, if less well-documented application in middle-class homes? Furthermore, the degree to which any perceived benefits from these motion-based beds were due to actual physiological effects on the nervous system or circulation versus the potent psychological comfort derived from investing in a novel, impressively scientific treatment and the focused, ritualistic attention it represented is, of course, very difficult to ascertain with any certainty from this historical distance. But as you imagine yourself lying in one of these contraptions, feel the gentle rhythmic sway, a mechanical lullaby in the deep quiet of your Victorian bedroom. Hear the faint rhythmic creak or the soft whirring of the clockwork mechanism beneath you, a steady, predictable sound in the darkness. Sense the feeling of being cradled, supported, and gently persuaded towards slumber. Whether it was the motion itself or simply the comforting thought of such dedicated ingenuity being applied to your sleeplessness, perhaps it might have offered a few precious hours of peace. Having explored these methods of lulling the entire body through motion, our next sleepy stop will be to examine gadgets that took a more targeted approach, focusing on specific parts of the anatomy believed to be key to unlocking the gates of sleep, particularly devices designed to cool the supposedly overheated head or stimulate the sluggish spine. We've just been gently rocked and swayed by the rather charming, if mechanically complex world of Victorian motion-based sleep aids. Those elaborate clockwork beds and oscillating couches designed to lull the restless adult into slumber, as if they were a babe in a cradle. Having tried to manage the very air the insomniac breathed, and then the movement of their entire body, Victorian ingenuity next turned its focus to more specific targeted therapies. If general atmospheric adjustments or full-body lullabies didn't do the trick, perhaps the problem lay in a specific misbehaving part of the anatomy. And the two prime suspects often implicated in the crime of sleeplessness were the overheated or overactive brain and the sluggish or irritated spine. So let's now quietly investigate the curious devices designed to bring thermal and tactile relief to these apparently very troublesome bodily regions. One of the most persistent and popular theories for insomnia in the 19th century was the idea of cerebral hyperemia, or to put it more simply, too much blood rushing to the brain. It was believed that an overactive mind, perhaps one buzzing with the anxieties of modern commerce, the excitement of a new novel, or the mental strain of intellectual pursuits, would draw an excess of blood to the head. This cerebral congestion, it was thought, made the brain feverish, excitable, and utterly resistant to the call of sleep. The logical remedy, therefore, was to cool the head down to reduce this supposed inflammation and soothe the overwrought brain into a state of calm. So, the Victorian insomniac's motto when faced with a racing mind might well have been, if your brain is simply too hot to trot off to dreamland, then by Jove, let's just stick it in the fridge. Or at least the closest 19th century equivalent, which usually involved a damp cloth, some ingenious contraptions, and a very healthy dose of wishful thinking. This led to a variety of head-cooling gadgets. Simpler versions included evaporative cooling head caps or bands. Imagine a cap made of porous fabric, perhaps chamois leather, or several layers of linen which you would soak in cool water, or even a specially prepared refrigerant lotion, often containing ingredients like camphor or eau de cologne for their cooling sensation and scent. You'd then wear this damp contraption on your head, and as the liquid slowly evaporated, it would in theory draw heat away from your fevered brow and calm your racing thoughts. For a more direct approach, ice caps or bladders filled with crushed ice, a luxury in itself, for many could be applied to the head or the back of the neck. These were essentially the Victorian precursors to our modern gel-filled cooling eye masks or headache wraps, though likely a good deal more drippy and less comfortable. For the truly dedicated cerebral chiller, more elaborate devices, sometimes grandly termed cerebral refrigerators or patent head coolers, were devised. These might involve helmet-like structures with internal chambers designed to hold ice or to allow cool water or even chilled air to circulate around the scalp, via a system of tubes and perhaps a small hand-operated bellows. Some of these contraptions, judging by patent diagrams, looked less like soothing sleep aids and more like something a particularly eccentric scientist might wear while attempting to communicate with distant planets. The Victorians, as we're learning, were rarely ones to shy away from a bit of dramatic, scientific-looking headgear if it promised relief. Even pillows were designed with head cooling in mind, perhaps stuffed with materials like hops, which were also believed to have a natural sedative effect, due to their scent, or buckwheat hulls which allowed for better air circulation, or featuring internal channels designed to promote a cooler sleeping surface for the head. While the brain was often seen as being too hot and too active in cases of insomnia, the spine sometimes came under suspicion for being too cold, too sluggish, or irritated, thereby disrupting the proper flow of nervous energy essential for healthy sleep. It's a well-established mainstream historical fact that based on these prevailing theories of insomnia being caused by either cerebral hyperemia, excess blood and heat in the brain, or some form of spinal irritation or nervous imbalance, Victorian physicians and entrepreneurial inventors developed and promoted a wide variety of appliances for applying cold to the head, such as specialized ice caps, evaporating lotions, or cooling pillows, or conversely applying counter-irritation warmth or stimulation to the spine using special compresses, friction devices, or even mild electrical or magnetic applicators along the vertebral column. Thus, you had a range of spinal application gadgets. If your spine was deemed irritated or inflamed, an ice bag or a cold compress might be applied along its length. If, however, it was considered sluggish or lacking in vital warmth, then a hot water bag, a recent invention in the Victorian era itself, a warmed flannel or a special heated spinal compress might be prescribed to soothe the nerves or encourage a healthy flow of nervous fluid. Some theories suggested that gentle friction or counter-irritation along the spine could awaken dormant nerve centers or draw morbid humors away from the brain. This led to the creation of spinal brushes, long-handled brushes with moderately stiff bristles, or other friction devices that the insomniac or an obliging family member could use to vigorously rub their back before bed. Sometimes these were even combined with weak electrical currents or magnetic elements for a multi-pronged assault on spinal sluggishness. Their spinal treatments often sound a bit like trying to jumpstart a rather old and temperamental motor car. Right then, just a bit of vigorous friction along the vertebrae, perhaps a mild electric tingle from this handsome brass spinal electrode in your nervous engine, should be purring its way to peaceful slumber in no time at all. Or at the very least, you'll have a remarkably well-exfoliated and possibly slightly alarmed bag. The science underpinning these targeted thermal and tactile therapies was by modern standards quite rudimentary. It was often based on very generalized, sometimes metaphorical understandings of circulation nerve function, and thermodynamics frequently intermingled with older humoral theories about balancing bodily heat, cold, dampness, and dryness. While a cool cloth undoubtedly feels pleasant on a feverish head or a warm compress can soothe an aching back, whether these applications could truly address the complex neurological and psychological roots of chronic insomnia in the way their inventors claimed is, of course, highly debatable. A quirky tidbit from this era of targeted therapies is the existence of some rather charmingly specific, if entirely unproven herbal spinal soothers. One popular home remedy often recommended in ladies' journals involved creating a long, narrow pillow or spinal bag filled with a carefully selected mixture of dried aromatic herbs like lavender, chamomile, and hops. Perhaps with some warmed bran or salt mixed in for added gentle heat retention. The insomniac would then position this fragrant warm bag along their spine as they lay in bed, hoping that the gentle sustained heat and the soothing aromatic vapors would unblock any congested nervous channels and permit soporific influences to gently ascend to the brain, thereby inviting tranquil repose. It sounds rather cozy, actually, even if its direct physiological impact on sleep was minimal. Historians of medicine often debate whether these various targeted thermal therapies, the elaborate head cooling contraptions, and the diverse spinal warming or cooling applications were primarily rooted in much older pre-Victorian humoral theories about balancing the body's fundamental heat and fluids, or if they represented an early, albeit often crude and speculative, attempt by Victorian practitioners to engage with the emerging neurological understandings of brain and spinal cord function in health and disease. Furthermore, the perceived efficacy of these often quite cumbersome treatments likely varied enormously from individual to individual. Some people may well have found genuine, if temporary, comfort and a degree of relaxation from the simple sensation of cooling their forehead or warming their back, which in itself might have been enough to help them drift off. For others, one imagines the sheer faff and awkwardness of trying to sleep while wearing a dripping head cooler or lying perfectly still on a lumpy spinal bag might have only exacerbated their sleepless agitation. Imagine the complete Victorian bedtime ensemble. One might have employed perhaps a magnetic corset for overall balance, an electric belt for vitalizing the nerves, a sophisticated cerebral refrigeration helmet to calm the overactive brain, and a gently warmed herbal spinal pad to ensure harmonious nervous flow. You wouldn't just be preparing for sleep, you'd be courageously conducting a one-person multi-gadget scientific experiment in extreme personal wellness technology every single night. One certainly hopes they remembered to label all the various switches, dials, and soaking solutions correctly. Having attempted to cool the head and either soothe or stimulate the spine, the Victorian insomniac still had other senses to consider. Our next gentle stop will be to explore the ingenious and sometimes rather isolating gadgets they devised to control their sensory environment by blocking out the unwelcome intrusions of light and sound. We've just explored the rather curious Victorian practice of applying targeted thermal therapies, cooling the supposedly overheated brain, and either warming or stimulating the allegedly sluggish spine, all in the earnest hope of coaxing forth the elusive Sandman. Having attempted to regulate the air around the insomniac, the motion of their entire body, and even the temperature of specific body parts, Victorian ingenuity then turned its attention to another critical factor in achieving peaceful slumber: controlling the sensory environment itself. If the inner workings of the body proved resistant to mechanical persuasion, perhaps the answer lay in creating an impenetrable fortress of quiet and darkness around the sleepless individual. So let's now gently draw the heavy velvet curtains and tiptoe into the world of Victorian sensory blockers, those early attempts at crafting silent sanctuaries for the restless. You'll recall from our earlier wanderings that the Victorian urban environment, with its clattering hooves, rumbling carts, distant factory hums, and the ever-present hiss and flicker of gaslight, was hardly a haven of nocturnal tranquility. Add to this the internal household noises, Creaking floorboards in old houses, the rustle of servants beginning their early morning chores, perhaps even the snores of a nearby family member. And you have a veritable symphony of potential sleep disturbances. The nervous Victorian, already believed to be exquisitely sensitive to any form of stimulation, would find these sensory intrusions particularly vexing when trying to fall asleep or stay asleep. Light, even the dim glow seeping from a street lamp, or the early dawn light penetrating inadequate window coverings, was understood to be stimulating and wakeful. Noise, of course, was an obvious enemy of repose, so the quest began for ways to create a perfect cocoon of darkness and silence. For achieving darkness, the most straightforward approach involved substantial window coverings. Victorian bedrooms were famous for their heavy curtains, often made of thick velvet brocade or multiple layers of fabric, frequently with elaborate pelmets and swags. These served multiple purposes, providing warmth in drafty houses, ensuring privacy in increasingly crowded cities, and, crucially for the insomniac, blocking out as much external light as possible. Wooden shutters, either internal or external, were also common. However, even the heaviest drapery might still allow slivers of unwanted light to creep around the edges or through the weave of the fabric. This led to the development and use of more personal light-blocking aids, the ancestors of our modern sleep masks. These early Victorian eye masks were typically simple affairs, perhaps just a rectangle of soft padded fabric, silk velvet, or even quilted cotton, held in place with a ribbon or elastic band. Some might be gently scented with dried lavender or chamomile, those traditional herbal calmatives, hoping to add an olfactory nudge towards slumber. More elaborate versions could be quite luxurious, perhaps with weighted elements of fine sand or lead shot sewn into the brow area, designed to apply a gentle, soothing pressure to the temples, or the organs of vexation, as one delightfully named patent device apparently called them. Behold the nocturnal nerve soother and optical occluder, a rather grandly titled contraption. One advertisement might have proclaimed essentially a very thick, sumptuously quilted silk eye mask, cunningly filled with a proprietary blend of dried hops, valerian root, and just a whisper of magnetically charged iron filings. It promises not just impenetrable darkness, but also a profound and scientifically endorsed sense of cranial calm and magnetic realignment. Results may vary, batteries if it had any not included. Achieving silence in a bustling Victorian world was an even greater challenge. The most basic and widely used tools were early forms of earplugs. These were often homemade or very simple. Wads of beeswax softened by the warmth of the hands, and then molded to fit the ear canal were a common choice. Cotton wool was another option, sometimes recommended to be soaked in olive oil glycerin, or rather alarmingly, even a dilute solution of laudanum, with the dangerous idea that the sedative might be absorbed and contribute to sleep, a practice fraught with peril. Needless to say, as new materials became available later in the century, like soft rubber or gutta percha, a natural latex, these might also have been fashioned into more effective, if still rudimentary, ear-stopping devices. Their earplugs certainly sound interesting. One can almost hear a Victorian chemist earnestly advising, "For a truly silent and undisturbed night, madam, I highly recommend our patent beeswax and laudanum ear stoppers. You absolutely will not hear a single pin drop. You also might not hear the house burning down, or indeed ever wake up again. But these are mere trifling details in the grand pursuit of profound slumber." Beyond direct earplugs, other items might have offered some sound-muffling benefits. Thickly padded nightcaps or bonnets, while primarily for warmth as cold heads, were also sometimes blamed for wakefulness, in a delightful contradiction. To the head cooling theories could also help to reduce the impact of ambient noise. And those grand four-poster beds with their heavy enclosing bed hangings, again primarily for warmth, privacy, and keeping out drafts and miasmas, would also have created a more insulated, slightly sound-dampened micro-environment around the sleeper. Of course, health manuals of the period often advised on the importance of choosing the quietest room in the house for one's bedroom, ideally one situated at the back, away from the noisy street, and as far as possible from the kitchen scullery or servants' quarters where early morning activity might begin. This was all part of the broader Victorian ideal of trying to create a sensory cocoon, a peaceful, undisturbed personal sanctuary where the overwrought nerves could finally calm down and sleep could be gently invited rather than wrestled into submission. It's a well-established mainstream historical fact that while not always categorized as gadgets in the strictly mechanical sense, Victorian individuals routinely employed various simple but effective methods and specially made aids to minimize disruptive sensory disturbances during the night. This included the widespread use of heavy window draperies and shutters to block light. The adoption of early forms of sleep masks made of padded silk or velvet, and the fashioning of rudimentary earplugs from materials like beeswax, treated cotton wool, or emerging rubber compounds, all reflecting a clear and practical understanding that controlling external light and noise could significantly improve the chances of achieving restful sleep. Historians who study Victorian domestic life and medical history sometimes debate the extent to which these sensory deprivation techniques were a consciously scientific or medicalized approach to sleep hygiene driven by doctors' advice and health manuals, versus simply being an intuitive continuation or elaboration of age-old common-sense practices for creating a comfortable and conducive sleeping environment. The line between what your grandmother might have told you, like using lavender for calm, and what a learned physician might prescribe, perhaps a scientifically endorsed medicated eye mask, was often quite beautifully blurred. Furthermore, the social implications of such devices are rather interesting to ponder. Did the increasing use of things like elaborate sleep masks and earplugs represent a kind of personal retreat from the ever more noisy, visually stimulating and demanding modern industrial world? Was it a subconscious desire for a personal sanctuary? A temporary escape, particularly among the more sensitive or affluent classes who could afford such refinements? Imagine the dedication involved in preparing for a Victorian night's sleep if you were a committed insomniac, carefully drawing those massive blackout curtains that probably weighed more than a small child, adjusting your scientifically designed sleep mask that could quite possibly double as a rather elaborate theatrical prop for a masked ball, and then meticulously inserting your bespoke beeswax earplugs that made you look like you were preparing for a perilous deep-sea diving expedition. All this simply in the name of hopefully getting those elusive 8 hours of repose. The sheer commitment was undeniably real. By attempting to create these silent, dark sanctuaries, the Victorians were acknowledging the profound impact of the external environment on their internal state. Having tried to manage the air, the motion, the temperature, and now the sensory input, there was still one more major element they sought to harness in their quest for sleep: the soothing, cleansing, and sometimes surprisingly invigorating power of water. Our next gentle immersion will be into the world of Victorian home hydrotherapy. We've just been exploring the rather ingenious, if sometimes slightly isolating, Victorian attempts to create silent, dark sanctuaries for the sleepless, using everything from heavy velvet curtains to elaborate padded eye masks and rudimentary earplugs. Having tried to manage the air, the motion, the temperature of specific body parts, and the sensory input from the outside world, there was yet another powerful natural element that the Victorians enthusiastically embraced in their relentless quest to conquer insomnia water. So let's now gently immerse ourselves in the world of Victorian home hydrotherapy and discover the portable baths and curious water-based gadgets designed to wash away wakefulness and invite the gentle embrace of slumber. The 19th century was truly the golden age of hydropathy, or the water cure. This system of healing, which involved the therapeutic use of water in all its forms, hot, cold, tepid steam sprays, baths, compresses, and even internal douching, though hopefully not for insomnia, became immensely popular across Europe and America. Grand spa towns and hydropathic establishments like those in Malvern in England, under the stern guidance of Dr. James Manby Gully, or Smedley's Hydro in Matlock, Derbyshire, founded by John Smedley, attracted thousands of patients seeking relief from a vast array of ailments. Nervous disorders, digestive complaints, rheumatism, and of course persistent insomnia were all considered prime candidates for the water cure. There was a profound belief in water's intrinsic power to cleanse the body, soothe agitated nerves, improve circulation, restore vital energy, and generally promote a state of natural health. So, the Victorian secret to a good night's sleep, when all else failed, often involved a bath. Groundbreaking, I know, but they truly elevated it to an art form, often with more specific temperature protocols, prescribed durations, and accompanying therapeutic paraphernalia than a modern luxury spa. Now, not everyone had the time or the financial means to decamp to a fashionable hydropathic spa for weeks on end, Recognizing this, enterprising inventors and physicians developed a range of devices and promoted specific techniques to bring the benefits of hydrotherapy right into the Victorian home, particularly for tackling sleeplessness. This led to the creation of various portable hip baths and sitz baths. Imagine these perhaps made of tin zinc or even polished copper, not as luxurious as a full-sized installed bathtub, which was still a rarity in many homes but practical for their purpose. They could be filled with water heated on the kitchen range and then used for specific evening ablutions, believed to calm the nervous system and prepare the body for rest. Some more elaborate versions might even have a small built-in heater, perhaps a spirit lamp to maintain the water temperature during a prolonged therapeutic soak. For more targeted applications, there were sponging and effusion apparatuses. These might involve a basin on a stand with an attached hose and a nozzle, or a rose head sprinkler allowing the insomniac or an assistant to direct gentle sprays or trickles of cool or tepid water onto specific body parts thought to influence sleep. The head to cool that overactive brain, the back of the neck, the spine, or the feet. The idea was that these localized applications of water at carefully prescribed temperatures could have a profound effect on the nervous system and circulation. While not strictly gadgets themselves, the various medicated additives for these home baths were an integral part of the hydrotherapeutic approach to insomnia. Your Victorian physician might prescribe specific herbs, mineral salts like Epsom salts, mustard powder, or even more potent substances to be added to your evening hip bath or foot bath, each with its own supposed sleep-inducing or nerve-calming properties. The ritual of preparing these medicated baths with their often pungent or aromatic scents could itself become a calming pre-sleep routine. Foot baths in particular were a popular home remedy, sometimes featuring therapeutic enhancements like built-in rollers or specially textured bottoms for a kind of primitive reflexology, or even attachments for introducing steam or medicated vapors to soothe tired feet and, by extension, a tired mind. It's a well-documented mainstream historical fact that the 19th century witnessed a tremendous enthusiasm for hydropathy, or the water cure, not quite as a legitimate medical treatment. This led not only to the establishment of numerous specialized hydropathic institutions, but also spurred the development and widespread marketing of various types of portable baths, specialized douches, sponging apparatus, and sitz baths designed for home use, all frequently prescribed by physicians and lauded in popular health manuals for treating nervous conditions, digestive ailments, and especially stubborn cases of insomnia. The theories behind why these water cures were thought to banish sleeplessness were varied, drawing on both traditional wisdom and emerging, if still somewhat rudimentary, physiological understanding. The temperature of the water was considered key. A cool sponging of the head or a cool sitz bath was believed to reduce that cerebral excitement and draw blood away from the overactive brain. Conversely, a warm, full bath or foot bath was thought to relax the muscles, dilate blood vessels in the periphery, and thus also divert blood from the head, promoting drowsiness. Tepid baths, neither too hot nor too cold, were often recommended for their generally soothing and calming effect on the entire nervous system. Water treatments were also believed to equalize blood circulation throughout the body, preventing the supposed congestion in certain organs that could lead to restlessness. And the simple sensation of water on the skin, especially a prolonged immersion, or the gentle rhythmic application of sprays or trickles, was thought to directly soothe irritated nerve endings and calm an agitated mind. There was also often a metaphorical sense of cleansing and purification, as if the water were literally washing away not just physical grime, but also the morbid humors, nervous irritations, or the accumulated stresses of the day that were keeping sleep at bay. A quirky tidbit that illustrates the sometimes elaborate nature of these home hydrotherapy setups is the patent portable vapor bath and somnolent spritzer. Imagine, if you will, a contraption somewhat resembling a personal canvas sentry box or a very tall enclosed sedan chair. The insomniac would sit on a stool inside this canvas tent, which was placed over a spirit lamp, safely heating a pan of water, often medicated with herbs like chamomile or hops. As the steam filled the tent, a separate, cleverly designed system of small pipes, perhaps connected to a rubber bulb an assistant could squeeze, would then gently spray or spritz the warm medicated vapor onto the patient's spine or temples. The advertisement might promise that this immersive experience would gently open the pores, permitting the expulsion of nervous toxins, while simultaneously tranquilizing the nerve fibrils and inducing a profound and natural slumber. It was essentially a personal, portable, slightly precarious Victorian steam room and targeted misting device, all in the comfort and potential dampness of your own chilly bedroom. Their home hydrotherapy gadgets were truly the original DIY spa kits. Can't afford a fortnight at a fashionable German water cure establishment? No problem at all, madam. Here's a rather fetching collapsible tin bathtub. A spirit lamp that might, with a bit of bad luck, set your bed curtains ablaze, and 3 full pages of highly scientific instructions on how to scientifically splash, soak, and spritz yourself into a state of blissful unconsciousness. Historians of Victorian medicine and culture often debate whether the widespread and often fervent belief in the efficacy of hydrotherapy for treating serious nervous disorders like chronic insomnia was primarily based on any genuine, consistently reproducible physiological benefits beyond the obvious benefits of basic relaxation, improved personal hygiene, or the simple placebo effect, or if its immense popularity was more attributable to the impressive, often highly ritualistic nature of the treatments, the powerful back-to-nature appeal of using pure water as a remedy, and the often charismatic and persuasive influence of its leading proponents and the institutions they founded. Furthermore, the extent to which these simplified home hydrotherapy devices could actually replicate the much more intensive, varied, and physician-supervised treatments available at the specialized hydropathic spas, and indeed their practical accessibility and affordability to different social classes, remains an active area of study and discussion. Imagine the quiet ritual, the carrying of heated water, the scent of bath herbs like lavender or pine filling the air, the sound of water gently trickling or splashing, the feeling of warmth or invigorating coolness on your skin, the thorough drying with a coarse linen towel. The entire process, quite apart from any specific physiological effect of the water itself, could have been a profoundly calming and centering pre-sleep routine, a deliberate stepping away from the anxieties of the day. It was all very precise, this watery path to slumber. One could almost picture a detailed instruction manual for a Victorian sleep-inducing douche. Apply tepid water via the patent flexible India rubber tubing to the nape of the neck for precisely 7.5 minutes, ensuring a gentle, non-agitating flow. This should be followed by a brisk friction rub with a specially coarsened towel, and then 3 drops of tincture of valerian upon the pillow. If still inconveniently awake after 1 hour, repeat the entire process, and perhaps seriously question your recent dietary choices and the moral tone of your evening reading material. Having now bathed, sprayed, and soaked our way through the Victorian insomniac's watery regimes, it's time to delve into the often rather peculiar scientific theories and dubious medical reasoning that underpinned not just these hydrotherapy gadgets, but many of the other curious contraptions we've encountered on our journey so far. We've just had a rather refreshing, if sometimes chilly or surprisingly steamy dip into the world of Victorian home hydrotherapy, where the curative powers of water were enthusiastically applied to wash away the stubborn troubles of sleeplessness. Having now explored a whole cabinet of curiosities, from electric belts and magnetic corsets to ventilating contraptions, rocking beds, head coolers, and water cure apparatus, it's perhaps a good moment to pause our sleepy journey and gently peer behind the polished brass and mahogany behind the confident advertisements, and try to understand the often rather peculiar scientific reasoning, or perhaps more accurately, the sometimes wonderfully flawed theories that underpin this whole fascinating array of Victorian insomnia gadgets. As we've touched upon, the Victorians lived in an age of burgeoning scientific discovery, and they possessed an immense, almost touching faith in the power of science and reason to explain and eventually solve all human problems. This enthusiasm, however, sometimes outpaced actual scientific understanding, especially in the complex realm of human health and physiology. When it came to an ailment as perplexing and distressing as insomnia, inventors and medical theorists were often quick to seize upon the latest scientific buzzwords or prevailing physiological hypotheses, however tentative or unproven, and build entire therapeutic systems and indeed entire gadgets upon them. The Victorian approach to explaining why their insomnia gadgets should work was often a masterpiece of creative scientific writing. By subtly repolarizing your primary cerebral ether, one might claim, and encouraging a gentle downwards decantation of any superfluous nervous humors that may be causing nocturnal agitation. Right. Or maybe that gently vibrating magnetic hat just gives you a rather pleasant, if slightly odd, head massage. One of the most dominant theories we've encountered lurking behind many of these inventions was the idea of an imbalance in nervous energy. Your nerves, those delicate, mysterious pathways, could become weak, overstimulated, exhausted, irritated, or congested. Insomnia was a prime symptom of such a nervous derangement. Thus, gadgets like the electric belts and magnetic corsets were designed to recharge, soothe, rebalance, or harmonize this vital nervous force, restoring its proper flow and thereby inviting sleep. Spinal soothers, whether thermal or mechanical, aim to either calm an irritated spinal cord or stimulate a sluggish one, all in the name of restoring nervous equilibrium. Then there was the very popular theory of cerebral hyperemia, that overactive or hot brain idea. The notion was that too much intellectual activity, emotional distress, or even just the general hubbub of modern city life could cause an excess of blood to rush to the brain, leading to a state of mental excitement and physical feverishness that made sleep impossible. This directly inspired all those head-cooling contraptions we saw, from simple evaporative caps to more elaborate cerebral refrigerators, all designed to draw that troublesome excess blood away from the brain and cool it down to a more sleep-conducive temperature. The pervasive miasma theory also played its part. Bad air, or miasmata, laden with invisible impurities and noxious effluvia from drains decay or overcrowding, was widely believed to cause not just infectious diseases but also general ill-health, nervous irritability, and consequently sleeplessness. This fear fueled the development of those myriad ventilation gadgets, all aiming to ensure a constant supply of pure, fresh, or even ozonized air in the bedroom, banishing the vitiated, sleep-stealing vapors of the night. The burgeoning sciences of electricity and magnetism, as we've seen, provided a rich source of inspiration. Since these invisible forces were clearly powerful and seemed to have an almost life-giving quality, it was a relatively small leap of faith to assume they could directly influence the body's own vital currents, or magnetic fluids. If these internal energies were out of whack, leading to insomnia, then applying a gentle external electrical or magnetic field via a belt, a corset, or a headband seemed like a perfectly logical way to restore harmony and coax the body back to its natural rhythms. And while the old humoral theories of medicine, the idea of balancing the body's four humors, blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, were generally declining in mainstream medical thought by the Victorian era, their echoes could still be heard. Ideas about congestion, impurities needing to be drawn out, or the importance of balancing bodily fluids sometimes subtly inform the rationale behind certain hydrotherapeutic practices, or even some of the claims made for magnetic or electrical devices. Beyond these broader theories, the Victorian era was also rife with popular pseudosciences that lent their own peculiar logic to some of these gadgets. Phrenology, the belief that the contours of the skull indicated specific mental faculties and personality traits, was immensely popular. While not directly a sleep cure itself, it fostered an idea of the brain as a collection of distinct organs. And it's not too far a stretch to imagine some inventors claiming their headgear could gently stimulate a supposed sleep organ or calm an overactive organ of anxiety through precise cranial pressure or application of some gentle force. Remember that spring-loaded headband designed to press on specific sleep bumps? That's phrenological thinking in action. Mesmerism, or animal magnetism, though its initial sensational heyday was perhaps a little earlier, continued to influence popular understanding of invisible bodily forces and the potential for healing through the manipulation of these vital fluids, feeding directly into the rationale for magnetic therapies. It is a significant mainstream historical fact that Victorian advertisements for health gadgets and patent medicines frequently employed elaborate and often bewildering pseudoscientific terminology. They would confidently cite supposed immutable laws of nature, groundbreaking discoveries by eminent and sometimes entirely fictional continental professors, or highly complex and often completely unproven or wildly misunderstood physiological theories to lend an impressive air of scientific authority and irrefutable efficacy to their products. Words like galvanic currents, otic force, vital effluvia, cerebral equilibrium, nervous fluid dynamics, and atmospheric revitalization were sprinkled liberally throughout their promotional literature, dazzling and perhaps slightly bamboozling the hopeful consumer. The glaring gap, of course, was the almost complete lack of rigorous objective testing for any of these devices. The modern concept of double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trials was a distant dream. Efficacy was usually proven through glowing anecdotal testimonials, often from unverifiable sources or paid endorsers, vague appeals to natural principles, or simply the inventor's own unshakable conviction and persuasive rhetoric. A quirky tidbit that perfectly captures this blend of inventive optimism and rather fantastical science is the story of one Dr. E.P. Miller, an American health reformer who in the late 19th century strongly advocated for what he called the solar bath. While not strictly a gadget for insomnia alone, his theory was that exposure to sunlight through colored glass panes could have specific therapeutic effects. For instance, blue light was considered calming and sedative. He designed solariums and even portable solar bath cabinets, where one could bask in specifically filtered sunlight. One can imagine an insomniac being prescribed a soothing blue light bath before bed, based on the theory that this particular wavelength would gently calm the vibrations of the optic nerve and thus tranquilize the entire nervous system. It's a charmingly specific, if rather unproven, application of light therapy. Historians of science and medicine often engage in a fascinating debate regarding the mindset of the Victorian inventors and promoters of these myriad therapeutic gadgets. To what extent did they genuinely believe in the often quite flawed scientific theories they so confidently espoused? Were they earnest, if misguided, pioneers passionately convinced they were harnessing the forces of nature for the good of suffering humanity? Or were some, perhaps many more cynical entrepreneurs, knowingly exploiting public credulity, scientific illiteracy, and the desperate yearning for cures, all for commercial gain? The reality, as is so often the case, was likely a complex spectrum ranging from sincere conviction to outright quackery. Furthermore, the crucial role of patient expectation and the sheer theater of applying a complex, often impressive-looking scientific gadget in producing any perceived benefit, the powerful placebo effect, is a key area of ongoing discussion when assessing the subjective success of many of these Victorian insomnia cures. You almost have to admire their unwavering confidence, though. Their typical approach to inventing an insomnia cure often seemed to be step one: develop a vague, slightly alarming yet impressively scientific-sounding theory about, say, congested brain blood or insufficient cranial magnetism. Step 2. Invent a suitably complicated-looking brass and mahogany helmet with lots of interesting dials and perhaps a few trailing wires. Step 3. Write a very long and jargon-filled instruction manual. Step 4. Profit. And maybe, just maybe, if the patient believed hard enough, or was simply exhausted by the sheer effort of trying to understand the instructions and operate the device, they might actually fall asleep. Having now peeked into the often rather dubious science that powered these Victorian dreams of mechanical slumber, our next logical step is to see how these gadgets built upon such fascinatingly flawed foundations were actually marketed and sold to a hopeful and often quite desperate public. We've just been navigating the rather labyrinthine and often quite perplexing scientific theories that the Victorians so earnestly, if sometimes rather bizarrely, concocted to explain why their insomnia gadgets simply had to work. From rebalancing your vital nervous fluids with a gentle electric current to cooling down your supposedly overheated brain with a damp head cap, or ensuring your bedroom air was perfectly ozonized and free from noxious miasmas, the reasoning was often as inventive as the contraptions themselves. But even the most wonderfully flawed theory needs a good sales pitch to convince a weary, sleepless public to part with their hard-earned shillings. So let's now gently pull back the advertising hoardings of the 19th century and explore the persuasive, often dazzlingly deceptive ways these miracle cures for sleeplessness were marketed to a hopeful world. Step right up, ladies and gentlemen, tired and tormented souls. Do you yearn for the sweet, unbroken embrace of Morpheus? Are you weary of tossing and turning while the midnight chimes mock your wakefulness? Then you, sir or madam, are in desperate need of Professor Phineas P. Farnsworth's patented pneumatic, perpetual motion slumber inducer guaranteed. Guarantee subject to terms, conditions, and the highly unpredictable whims of your own nervous constitution to banish insomnia forever. The Victorian era, as we know, was a time of explosive growth in mass print media. Newspapers, popular magazines, illustrated journals, and cheap pamphlets proliferated, creating an unprecedented platform for advertising. And the purveyors of patent medicines and health gadgets were among the most enthusiastic and creative users of this new reach. The pages of Victorian periodicals were often crammed with bold, eye-catching advertisements for products promising to cure everything from baldness to bunions, and insomnia cures, both chemical and mechanical, were always front and center. So what were the key advertising tactics employed to sell these often rather strange, sleep-inducing contraptions? First and foremost, there were the exaggerated claims and seemingly ironclad guarantees. These gadgets weren't just going to help you sleep a little better. Oh no, they promised complete, rapid, and permanent cures for even the most stubborn, long-standing cases of insomnia. And often as a delightful bonus, they'd throw in cures for a whole laundry list of other associated or entirely unrelated ailments. Nervous debility, indigestion, palpitations, general weakness, and perhaps even a touch of melancholy. The guaranteed part, of course, was usually a masterpiece of fine print and hopeful optimism, rather than a legally binding contract. To bolster these grand claims, advertisers frequently deployed that impressive-sounding, but often utterly meaningless scientific jargon we encountered when looking at the theories. Advertisements would be filled with talk of galvanic currents, otic force, vital effluvia, cerebral equilibrium, nervous fluid dynamics, or atmospheric revitalization. These terms were designed to impress potential customers with the profundity of the science involved, even if the customers, and sometimes one suspects the advertisers themselves, had only the vaguest notion of what they actually meant. It sounded modern, it sounded authoritative, and that was often enough. Then there were the testimonials, a cornerstone of Victorian advertising. Pages would be filled with glowing letters from supposedly cured individuals, recounting their harrowing experiences with sleeplessness and their miraculous recovery thanks to the advertised gadget. Before discovering Dr. Quibble's patent clockwork cranial oscillator, one might read, "I was a wretched, sleepless husk of my former self, unable to perform my daily duties, a burden to my family. My nights were a torment of ceaseless agitation. But now, after just 1 week of gentle rhythmic cranial oscillation, I sleep like a babe. My appetite has returned, my domestic felicity is restored. My prize-winning roses have never looked better, and I find I can now yodel the entire works of Wagner with newfound vigor." Truly a miracle of modern science. These testimonials often featured endorsements from individuals with impressive sounding, if sometimes entirely self-awarded medical or scientific titles. Professor Emeritus of Somnology, consulting physician to a minor European royal who prefers to remain anonymous, or simply a grateful sufferer. The authenticity of these endorsements was, shall we say, often as creatively engineered as the gadgets themselves. Fear-mongering also played its part. Advertisements would vividly describe the dire and dreadful consequences of untreated insomnia or nervous exhaustion. The descent into madness, physical decay, loss of social standing, ruin of one's family and career, all designed to create a sense of urgency and motivate the sufferer to purchase the advertised cure without delay. This was often balanced with appeals to modernity and progress. The gadget would be presented as the very latest, most advanced scientific breakthrough, a testament to the enlightened age perfectly suited for the modern, discerning individual who valued scientific solutions over outdated superstitions or ineffective folk remedies. Elaborate illustrations and diagrams were also key. These would often show an impressive, perhaps slightly intimidating cutaway view of the gadget, highlighting its intricate internal workings, even if those workings were based on flawed principles. Or they might depict serene, beatific images of users peacefully asleep, often with a faint smile on their lips, sometimes even visited by benevolent-looking dream cherubs, all thanks to the miraculous device. The advertisements used direct, persuasive language addressing the suffering insomniac, personally empathizing with their plight and offering a clear, confident call to action. Delay no longer. Purchase your patent. Slumber inducer today and reclaim your nights. It is a significant mainstream historical fact that Victorian advertisements for health aids, including the myriad insomnia cures, frequently relied on a potent combination of persuasive techniques, dramatic and often unverifiable testimonials from supposed users' endorsements, from individuals brandishing self-proclaimed or sometimes dubious medical or scientific titles. Complex and obfuscating pseudoscientific explanations to lend an air of authority, and often wildly exaggerated promises of immediate, complete, and permanent relief from suffering, all flourishing within a largely unregulated advertising landscape where caveat emptor buyer beware was the prevailing principle. There were very few laws controlling advertising claims or ensuring product safety and efficacy. Landmark legislation like the Pure Food and Drug Act in the United States 1906 and similar efforts in Great Britain to regulate such claims came much later at the very end of the Victorian era or beyond. A quirky tidbit that perfectly illustrates the visual hyperbole of this advertising is the common use of before and after illustrations, especially for products claiming to cure nervous afflictions. One particularly memorable advertisement for a patent magnetic slumber cap, designed to soothe the agitated brain with its gentle magnetic emanations, featured a before sketch of a gentleman looking like a truly haggard, wild-eyed maniac. His hair akimbo, his eyes starting from their sockets clearly in the throes of profound nocturnal torment. Next to it, the after sketch, supposedly depicting the very same gentleman after just one night of wearing the cap, showed him peacefully asleep, a beatific smile upon his rosy-cheeked countenance. His hair perfectly combed, and often, for good measure, a few plump angelic cherubs floating benevolently above his head, perhaps strumming tiny harps. The transformative power of strategically placed head magnets was, according to the illustrators, apparently quite something to behold. Historians who study Victorian commerce and popular culture often debate the level of genuine cynicism or sincere belief among the advertisers and manufacturers of these numerous health gadgets. Were they all deliberate charlatans, knowingly preying on the desperation of the sick and sleepless? Or did some, perhaps many, genuinely believe in the efficacy of their products, however flawed their underlying theories, and simply employed the rather exaggerated and enthusiastic advertising conventions that were common to the day for all sorts of goods? The reality was likely a broad spectrum from earnest conviction to outright knowing fraud. Furthermore, the long-term impact of such pervasive and often deceptive advertising on public perceptions of health, the reliability of science, and the trustworthiness of the medical profession is a complex area, potentially fostering both a naive desire for quick-fix scientific solutions and concurrently a deep-seated skepticism due to the frequent disappointments that inevitably followed such grand promises. You almost wish you could go back in time and gently ask one of these enthusiastic gadget promoters, "So about this rather impressive guaranteed to cure all known nervous afflictions and induce 8 hours of profound, uninterrupted slumber, or your money cheerfully refunded offer. How's that actually working out for you in practice?" Because I have a sneaking suspicion you're mostly just guaranteeing a rather large number of slightly disappointed people now with marginally lighter wallets and a fascinating collection of very strange and possibly quite dusty bedside ornaments. The power of hope, however, especially for those suffering the nightly torment of insomnia, is a formidable force. And these advertisements, with their confident assurances and scientific-sounding pronouncements, offered a potent draft of that hope. Having seen how these gadgets were so persuasively, if not always entirely truthfully marketed, the crucial question that now gently floats into our minds is, did any of them actually work? Even if just a little, we've just been dazzled by the rather exuberant and often wildly optimistic promises made in Victorian advertisements for their myriad insomnia gadgets. From guaranteed permanent cures to testimonials lauding miraculous recoveries from the brink of nervous collapse, the marketing was certainly a masterclass in persuasive, if not always entirely truthful communication. But now, as we settle deeper into our own quiet repose, the crucial question gently surfaces: did any of these bizarre and wonderful contraptions, the electric belts, the magnetic corsets, the ventilating window inserts, the clockwork rocking beds, the head coolers, the home hydrotherapy spritzers, did any of them actually work? Did they truly bring the longed-for solace of sleep to those gaslit, restless Victorian nights? Assessing the true efficacy of these historical health gadgets from our modern vantage point is, as you can imagine, a rather tricky business. The Victorians, for all their burgeoning scientific spirit, lacked the rigorous methodologies we rely on today. There were no double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trials for Dr. Grimsby's galvanic girdle of good cheer. Objective measures of sleep quality, like polysomnography, which records brain waves, eye movements, and muscle activity, were centuries away. Instead, proof of a gadget's success relied heavily on purely anecdotal evidence, those often unverifiable testimonials we just talked about, or the subjective opinions of physicians who might themselves have a vested interest in promoting a particular device or theory. One of the most significant factors, undoubtedly, was the immense power of the placebo effect. Imagine you are a Victorian insomniac, desperate for relief, having tried countless home remedies, and perhaps some rather alarming patent medicines with little success. Then you read about a brand new, impressively scientific-sounding electromagnetic cerebral soother, complete with polished brass dials, intricate wiring, and a hefty instruction manual filled with learned pronouncements. You invest your precious shillings, you carefully follow the elaborate ritual of applying the device each night, and you do so with a profound sense of hope and expectation that this modern miracle will finally grant you peace. In such circumstances, it's entirely plausible that you would experience some improvement in your sleep, at least for a while. The novelty of the treatment, the focused attention on your problem, the reassuringly tangible nature of the gadget itself, and the sheer power of your own belief could all conspire to reduce anxiety and allow sleep to come more easily. The placebo effect for these Victorian sleep gadgets must have been working absolute overtime. I've diligently strapped Professor Phineas P. Farnsworth's patented magnetic helmet to my weary head. You might think, and I've carefully aligned its internal lodestones with the Earth's geomagnetic north, as per his very specific, slightly confusing instructions. Yes, I do believe I feel a distinct, almost imperceptible tingling sensation of well-being. And perhaps I feel slightly more optimistic about my impending and usually quite dreadful hours of sleeplessness. It's a veritable miracle of modern science. Still, beyond the placebo effect, some of these gadgets might have had some minor, perhaps unintended physiological effects that could have been conducive to relaxation for some individuals. For instance, the mild electrical currents from some devices or the gentle friction from a spinal brush could have acted as a counter-irritant. A new mild physical sensation that distracted the mind from anxious thoughts or other minor bodily discomforts, thereby allowing the natural inclination to sleep to take over. The very ritual of preparing and using a gadget, carefully soaking a head-cooling compress in lavender water, winding up a clockwork rocking bed, or taking a prescribed tepid foot bath with specific herbal additives, could in itself have been a calming, structured, and mindful pre-bedtime routine, signaling to the body and mind that it was time to prepare for rest. This is something we still recognize the value of in modern sleep hygiene, and some devices might have offered a degree of genuine, if limited, local comfort. A well-designed pillow that did indeed allow for better air circulation around the head might have felt subjectively cooler and more pleasant than a stuffy feather bolster, even if it didn't magically cure chronic insomnia. A properly functioning window ventilator might have slightly improved the air quality in a particularly close and stuffy Victorian bedroom. The gentle warmth from a heated spinal compress, or the cooling sensation from an evaporating lotion, could have had genuinely soothing physical effects on tired muscles or a feverish brow. However, it's also crucial to acknowledge the likelihood of failures and disappointments. For individuals suffering from severe chronic insomnia rooted in deep psychological distress, serious underlying medical conditions, or profoundly disruptive living environments, it's highly improbable that a magnetic corset or clockwork rocking bed, no matter how ingeniously designed or persuasively advertised, would have offered a lasting solution. The cycle of hope followed by disappointment must have been a familiar and disheartening one for many Victorian insomniacs. And some gadgets, let's be honest, might have even made sleep worse. Imagine trying to sleep while uncomfortably trussed up in an ill-fitting electric belt that occasionally gave you an unexpected jolt, or while listening to the incessant, noisy creaking and whirring of a poorly maintained mechanical bed, or feeling increasingly anxious about the strange helmet-like contraptions strapped to your head. Sweet dreams would likely remain very elusive. So did Dr. Wigglesworth's wondrous wobbly bed actually cure insomnia? Well, the advertisements undoubtedly swore on a stack of Bibles and a bust of Queen Victoria that it did. The actual users. Their reviews, if we could unearth them from dusty diaries, were probably a bit more mixed. Day 5 of the wobbly bed trial. Still not sleeping soundly, dear diary, but I must confess I do believe I have developed quite excellent core strength from the nightly effort of trying not to be gently catapulted onto the chamber pot. It's a significant mainstream historical fact that assessing the true objective efficacy of the vast majority of these Victorian-era insomnia gadgets is exceptionally challenging due to the almost complete lack of scientific controlled testing at the time. Their popularity and persistence were often more a testament to clever marketing, the powerful placebo effect, the desperation of sufferers and the common Victorian practice of patients simultaneously employing a multitude of different remedies, gadgets, potions, dietary changes, lifestyle adjustments. Fervent prayer making it virtually impossible to isolate the specific impact, if any, of any single device. If sleep did improve, who was to say whether it was the new magnetic insoles, the nightly glass of warm milk, with a tot of brandy, or simply the fact that the noisy construction work down the street had finally finished? A quirky tidbit that suggests a contemporary awareness of the sometimes dubious nature of these gadgets can be found in the satirical publications of the era. The popular British magazine Punch, for example, with its witty cartoons and social commentary, often poked gentle and sometimes not so gentle fun at the Victorian obsession with health fads and the proliferation of peculiar patent gadgets. One might find cartoons depicting bewildered individuals hopelessly entangled in the wires of an electropathic device, or comically over-engineered contraptions promising to cure all ills, subtly signaling to its readers that perhaps not all these miracles of modern science were to be taken entirely at face value. Historians of medicine and technology often debate the overall societal impact of this profusion of therapeutic gadgets. Did they on balance represent a relatively harmless, if often expensive, outlet for pervasive health anxieties? Perhaps even providing some comfort through placebo or ritual? Or did their widespread promotion and the often false hope they engendered potentially delay or prevent individuals from seeking more effective, even if still limited by the standards of the day medical advice, or from making genuinely beneficial lifestyle changes related to diet, exercise, or stress management? Furthermore, the psychological aspect remains key. To what extent did the mere act of proactively trying a new, impressively scientific-looking remedy provide a crucial sense of agency, control, and hope to the long-suffering insomniac, which in itself could have been a genuinely therapeutic, if indirect, benefit, regardless of the gadget's intrinsic physical properties? You almost have to imagine some dedicated Victorians becoming veritable collectors of these sleep aids, their bedside tables, groaning under the weight of various coils, batteries, magnets, and spring-loaded whatsits. Oh, another new patent insomnia gadget advertised in The Times. You say don't mind if I do. It can take pride of place right next to my beloved patent electric hairbrush for nervous headaches and my rather handsome self-ventilating ozone-infused top hat. One of them is absolutely bound to work eventually, or at the very least they all look terribly impressive and scientifically advanced when Mrs. Higgins comes over for tea. Ultimately, while some individuals may well have found subjective relief, it's likely that most of these gadgets were in terms of curing the underlying causes of chronic insomnia more dude than dream machine. Their story tells us more about Victorian hope spheres and their unshakable belief in progress than about the science of sleep itself. And as the century wore on, the allure of these often cumbersome mechanical marvels would begin to wane, overshadowed by the rise of seemingly more potent and often far more perilous chemical solutions. We've just been pondering the rather crucial question of whether any of those ingenious, elaborate, and often quite bizarre Victorian insomnia gadgets actually worked. And while the placebo effect, the comfort of ritual, and perhaps the occasional accidental benefit might have brought a fleeting moment of peace to some, it's likely that for many chronic insomniacs, these mechanical marvels ultimately proved to be more dud than dream machine. The sheer disappointment of investing hope and shillings into a patent electric belt or a clockwork rocking bed, only to find oneself still staring at the gaslit ceiling at 3 a.m., must have been a familiar Victorian frustration. And so, as the 19th century wore on, and new scientific frontiers opened the allure of these sometimes cumbersome and often unreliable contraptions, began to wane, gradually overshadowed by what seemed like a more direct, more potent, and altogether more modern solution: the rise of powerful sedative drugs. Imagine yourself as that weary Victorian, having perhaps tried everything from magnetic corsets that promise to realign your vital fluids to complex window ventilators designed to ozonize your bedroom miasmas, all with limited success. The nightly ritual of strapping on devices, winding up mechanisms, or preparing special compresses might have started to feel less like a pathway to peace and more like a tedious, fruitless chore. Some of these gadgets, as we've imagined, could be quite expensive, bulky, and frankly a bit inconvenient to use night after night. And as medical science progressed, or at least as new chemical compounds became available, the promise of a simpler, quicker fix in the form of a pill or a draft must have held an immense appeal. The Victorians, after all, were great believers in progress, and if science could now offer a concentrated chemical essence to induce slumber, that might seem far more advanced and efficient than an old-fashioned, if charmingly intricate, mechanical bed. So they eventually decided that instead of trying to gently rock, magnetize, electrocute, or scientifically ventilate themselves to sleep with a giant, often noisy contraption, it was perhaps just a tad easier to take a little something that would, shall we say, strongly encourage their overactive brain to finally switch off for the night. Efficiency, Victorian style. We briefly touched upon some of the earlier sleep-inducing potions in Section 3. The ubiquitous laudanum, the bromides, the herbal concoctions often laced with alcohol. But as the latter part of the 19th century unfolded, the world of pharmacology was rapidly expanding. Chemists were beginning to isolate active compounds from traditional plant remedies like morphine from opium, leading to more precise, if also more potent, dosing. And crucially, they were starting to synthesize entirely new chemical compounds in their laboratories. This was the dawn of the modern pharmaceutical industry, and it brought with it a new generation of sedative and hypnotic drugs. Chloral hydrate, which we mentioned, gained popularity from the 1870s onwards. It was one of the first truly synthetic hypnotics, and was initially hailed by some as a safer alternative to opiates for inducing sleep. While it could be effective, its dangers, addiction, cardiac issues, and the risk of fatal overdose, accidental or otherwise, it infamously became known as knockout drops, soon became apparent. Another substance, paraldehyde, was introduced a bit later also as a sedative hypnotic. It was considered somewhat safer than chloral hydrate by some physicians in terms of cardiac risk, but it came with its own significant drawback: a terribly pungent, persistent, and unpleasant odor that would emanate from the patient's breath and skin, making them less than ideal company. Towards the very end of the Victorian era and into the early Edwardian period, new synthetic hypnotics like sulfonal, introduced in the late 1880s, and its relative Trianol became quite fashionable. These were lauded for their supposed ability to produce a natural sleep without the immediate after effects of opiates. However, they too carried serious risks, particularly cumulative toxicity with prolonged use, leading to severe neurological problems and even death. And while the age of barbiturates truly dawned just after the Victorian era officially ended with barbital or veronal being synthesized in 1903, the intensive search for such powerful, centrally acting, sedative compounds was well underway in the closing decades of the 19th century. This was the direction that scientific sleep medicine was heading. It is a significant mainstream historical fact that the late 19th and early 20th centuries saw considerable advancements in synthetic chemistry and pharmacology, leading to the introduction and increasingly widespread medical prescription of new synthetic sedative and hypnotic drugs such as chloral hydrate, paraldehyde, sulfonal, and eventually the first barbiturates. These compounds generally offered more potent, predictable, and often faster-acting effects in inducing sleep, compared to many older herbal remedies or the often unreliable and cumbersome mechanical devices, leading to their growing adoption by both physicians and patients, desperate for relief from insomnia despite their own considerable and often initially underestimated risks. The appeal of these new chemical comforters was manifold. They promised potency and speed. A few drops of a tincture or a single pill could seemingly achieve in minutes what a gently rocking bed might take hours to perhaps accomplish. There was an air of scientific precision about them. A measured dose of a known chemical compound felt more direct and medically sound to many than the vague currents, influences, or vibrations offered by the gadgets. And of course, they were undeniably convenient. Swallowing a pill was far simpler than setting up an elaborate hydrotherapy apparatus or ensuring your electric belt had fresh saline in its pads. Furthermore, as physicians themselves began to prescribe these new drugs with increasing confidence, this lent them a powerful aura of medical authority and legitimacy. Naturally, this shift towards potent pharmaceuticals brought with it a host of new problems. The issues of addiction, the development of tolerance requiring ever higher doses, debilitating withdrawal symptoms, the significant risk of accidental or intentional overdose, and a range of unpleasant or dangerous side effects were often poorly understood, downplayed, or simply accepted as an unfortunate trade-off for the promised relief from sleeplessness. A quirky tidbit from this transitional period can be found in some of the medical literature or advertisements for these new miracle sleep drugs, which sometimes directly disparage the older mechanical methods as being clumsy, old-fashioned, and ineffective. One prominent medical journal in the 1890s, enthusiastically hailing the arrival of a new synthetic hypnotic compound, confidently declared something to the effect of, "The rather cumbersome and often fanciful age of mechanical contrivances and external appliances for the inducement of sleep is now surely drawing to its destined close to be replaced by the elegant precision and direct efficacy of modern chemical therapeutics." This boundless optimism, while perhaps understandable given the initial perceived power of these new drugs, perhaps somewhat underestimated both the stubborn persistence of insomnia as a human condition and the future complexities and challenges that pharmacology itself would bring. As these new powerful pills and potions took center stage, the elaborate Victorian sleep gadgets, the clockwork beds, the magnetic corsets, the cerebral refrigerators, began to fade from mainstream use. They started to look a bit quaint, a bit anachronistic relics of a more mechanically minded, perhaps more naive approach to medicine. Some of the simpler, more common-sense aids like basic eye masks, earplugs, or perhaps a comforting hot water bottle itself, a Victorian invention, naturally persisted. But the grand, ambitious, often slightly terrifying mechanical sleep contraptions, they were largely relegated to dusty attics, patent office archives, and the occasional humorous footnote in medical history. It's like the Victorians collectively went from enthusiastically proclaiming, "Let's build a tiny, intricate steam engine to attach to the headboard of the bed," to a much simpler, if more potent mantra. "Actually, you know what? Here, just swallow this mysterious white powder the chemist gave me. It's much, much quicker." The evolution of sleep technology and its associated hopes and perils was indeed a wild and fascinating ride. Historians of medicine and pharmacology often debate whether this decisive shift from primarily mechanical or external sleep aids towards increasingly potent sedative drugs truly represented unadulterated medical progress at the time, or if it simply marked a move towards a different, and in some ways more insidious set of risks and benefits. Physicians and patients alike often lacked a full awareness of the long-term consequences, the addictive potential, or the true side effect profiles of these new pharmaceuticals in their early years of use. Furthermore, the role of the rapidly emerging and highly competitive pharmaceutical industry in actively promoting these new chemical compounds, and perhaps in subtly or not so subtly downplaying the appeal or efficacy of older, non-patentable methods like lifestyle advice, improved sleep hygiene, as it was then understood, or simpler mechanical aids as a significant and complex area of ongoing study. Imagine the relief, though, for the long-suffering Victorian spouse. Thank heavens for Dr. Snodgrass's newly discovered somnolent elixir number 7. No more having to get up in the middle of the night to rewind that infernal patent rocking bed, or painstakingly check if my beloved has accidentally magnetized himself to the cast iron fireplace tongs again. Progress is truly a wonderful thing. While these specific, often charmingly outlandish Victorian mechanical sleep gadgets may have largely disappeared from our bedrooms, the fundamental human quest for a good night's sleep, and our enduring fascination with using technology to achieve it, most certainly did not. And that, my friends, sets the stage perfectly for our final sleepy reflections. We've just witnessed the rather fascinating, if somewhat predictable, decline of those elaborate Victorian mechanical sleep gadgets as the allure of seemingly more potent, precise, and conveniently packaged chemical solutions, the new sedative drugs of the late 19th century, began to take hold. The whirring clockwork beds, the buzzing electric belts, the strangely comforting magnetic corsets all started to fade into the realm of quaint curiosities. But while these specific contraptions may have largely vanished from our modern bedrooms, the fundamental human quest for a good night's sleep and our enduring fascination with using ingenuity and technology to achieve it most certainly did not. So, for our final sleepy reflections tonight, let's gently trace some of the Victorian echoes that still resonate in our own contemporary approaches to slumber. Think back to the core of the Victorian insomnia struggle, those anxieties about a rapidly changing world, the pressures of modern life, the desire for scientific solutions, and that profound yearning for peaceful restorative rest. Does any of that sound a little familiar? While our gaslit streets have given way to electric lights and the clatter of hooves has been replaced by the hum of traffic, the fundamental human vulnerability to sleeplessness and the anxieties it breeds remain remarkably consistent. And when we look at how we try to woo sleep today, it's fascinating to see how many of our modern approaches armed. Though they are with far more sophisticated science and technology, find conceptual parallels in those earnest, if often pseudo-scientific efforts of our Victorian ancestors. Consider their attempts to control the bedroom environment. Those elaborate Victorian window ventilators and air purifiers designed to banish miasmas and ensure a supply of pure air. They find their modern descendants in our sophisticated air purifiers, humidifiers, dehumidifiers, and bedroom climate control systems, all aimed at creating an optimal atmospheric cocoon for sleep. Their heavy blackout curtains, rudimentary eye masks, and beeswax earplugs all striving to create a sanctuary of darkness and silence. We now have high-tech contoured blackout sleep masks, noise-canceling headphones or earbuds specifically designed for sleep white noise machines generating soothing soundscapes, and of course, infinitely more effective blackout blinds. So the next time you meticulously arrange your sleep sanctuary with your weighted eye mask, your noise-canceling earbuds playing gentle rain sounds, and your air purifier humming softly in the corner, just take a moment to remember you're basically a super high-tech, first-century Victorian insomniac. They would have absolutely loved your setup and then probably tried to figure out how to add a gentle, continuous electric current to it just for good measure. What about their motion-based sleep aids? Those charmingly complex clockwork rocking beds and adult-sized cradles. While a full-sized mechanically rocking adult bed isn't exactly a staple in modern furniture stores, the principle endures. We still instinctively rock babies to sleep, and many parents rely on sophisticated modern baby sleep rockers and smart bassinets that offer a range of motions and soothing sounds. For adults, the gentle sway of a rocking chair is still a recognized way to promote relaxation, and you can even find niche contemporary designs for adult cradles, or beds with subtle gentle sway or vibration features, all echoing that Victorian belief in the soporific power of rhythmic movement. Their thermal regulation gadgets like those head-cooling caps and spinal warmers also have modern counterparts. We now have cooling pillows infused with gel or made from breathable materials, specialized mattress toppers like chili pads or oolers that actively circulate temperature-controlled water beneath you, heated mattress pads for soothing warmth, and even smart beds that can adjust their temperature throughout the night to optimize your sleep stages. The Victorians were certainly onto something with the idea that temperature plays a crucial role in sleep, even if their methods for controlling it were a bit direct. Even their forays into gentle stimulation with electricity and magnetism, however, flawed. Their theories find faint echoes today, albeit with hopefully more scientific rigor. While those old electric belts are long gone, modern medicine does utilize devices like cranial electrotherapy, stimulation CES, which applies a very mild electrical current to the head, and is approved in some regions for treating anxiety, depression, and insomnia, though its efficacy and mechanisms are still subjects of ongoing research and debate. Transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation, ETNS units, are used for pain relief, and since pain can certainly disrupt sleep, there's an indirect connection. Pulsed electromagnetic field, PEMF therapy, is another area being explored for various health benefits, including improved sleep. Though again, the evidence base is still developing. The principle of using external energy fields to influence the body persists, now guided by a much deeper understanding of neurophysiology. And perhaps most strikingly, the Victorian desire for scientific solutions and their often meticulous, if misguided, approach to self-treatment is mirrored in our modern obsession with sleep tracking apps. Wearable fitness trackers like Fitbits, Apple Watches, or Oura Rings that monitor our sleep stages, and smart beds that provide detailed analytics on our nocturnal habits. If a Victorian inventor, bless his gadget-loving heart, could see a modern sleep tracker app on a smartphone, his head would probably explode with pure, unadulterated joy. You mean to tell me this tiny, magical, glowing rectangle can tell me precisely how abominably I slept last night, complete with graphs and percentages? And it doesn't even require a cumbersome hand crank, a bucket of leeches, or a single wire connected to a galvanic battery. Magnificent! Truly, we live in an age of wonders. The desire to quantify, analyze, and solve sleep with data and technology is a very Victorian impulse, simply updated for the digital age. It is a significant mainstream historical fact that many contemporary strategies for improving sleep hygiene and quality, such as meticulously controlling the bedroom environment in terms of light, sound, air quality, and temperature, utilizing rhythmic motion for relaxation, and increasingly tracking and analyzing sleep patterns with technology, find clear conceptual parallels and historical antecedents in the inventive, albeit often pseudo-scientific and largely unproven, efforts of the Victorians to combat insomnia with their diverse array of gadgets, aids, and health regimens. Of course, much is different today. We have a vastly improved scientific understanding of sleep physiology, circadian rhythms, and the complex neurological and psychological causes of insomnia. We ideally have more rigorous testing and regulation of health products. And there's a much greater emphasis now on evidence-based, non-pharmacological treatments, like cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI, and the importance of fundamental lifestyle changes. Yet some things remain strikingly the same. The powerful allure of a quick fix, a technological marvel, or a revolutionary new secret to perfect sleep is as strong as ever. The market for sleep aids, some more scientifically sound than others, is vast and ever-growing. And that fundamental human vulnerability to the quiet torment of a sleepless night and the deep anxiety it can cause persists across the centuries. A quirky tidbit that connects our eras is the modern popularity of weighted blankets, designed to provide a calming sensation of deep pressure touch, which many find soothing and sleep-inducing. While the science behind them is still being explored, this desire for a gentle, constant, reassuring pressure has a faint, if perhaps entirely unintentional, echo of some of those Victorian ideas about the soothing, nerve-calming pressure from certain tightly bound corsets when worn for support, or perhaps those weighted sleep masks we imagined, or even just the comforting heft of multiple heavy Victorian bedclothes. The modern proliferation of sophisticated sleep tracking technology and the trend towards biohacking for optimal sleep also raises ongoing societal discussions that mirror Victorian concerns. Are our current data-driven approaches genuinely leading to consistently better, more natural rest for everyone? Or do they sometimes inadvertently create new anxieties about achieving perfect sleep scores and adhering to ideal sleep parameters, perhaps echoing those Victorian anxieties about achieving perfect health and moral rectitude through often complex, externally imposed means? The Victorians, with their steam-powered optimism and their delightful, if sometimes alarming inventiveness, truly walked and rocked and magnetized and ventilated so that our modern smart beds could run. Detailed sleep analytics, and then gently wake us with a simulated sunrise and the scent of freshly brewed fair trade coffee. Progress. And so, our journey through the gaslit nights and gadget-filled bedrooms of the Victorian era, in search of their elusive cures for insomnia, gently comes to its end. We've seen their anxieties marveled at, their ingenuity chuckled softly at their pseudo-science, and perhaps even felt a pang of recognition for their desperate yearning for simple, peaceful rest. As these images of clockwork beds and electric corsets begin to fade, as the hiss of imaginary gaslight softens into the quiet of your own comfortable space, allow yourself to feel a sense of gentle continuity with those who have sought sleep before you. The specific gadgets change, the theories evolve, but the fundamental human need for rest, for that quiet harbor at the end of the day, remains a timeless constant. Let any lingering thoughts from our journey tonight become like soft, distant chimes of a Victorian mantel clock, marking not the anxious passing of sleepless hours, but the gentle, inevitable approach of your own deep and restorative slumber. There is nothing more to ponder now, nothing more to solve. Just the simple peace of this moment, the comfort of your bed, and the welcome stillness of the night. Allow yourself to drift, to float, to release as the quietude of the ages enfolds you in its soft, sleepy embrace.